Beneath the Carolina pines, something is watching. From ghost lights in the mountains to vanishings in broad daylight, North Carolina holds secrets that defy logic, time, and even history itself. This isn't folklore, it's police files, last known sightings, cold trails gone colder, 33 mysteries, 0 answers. Some are ancient, some happened last year. All refuse to be explained. So turn the lights down, keep your back to the wall, and ask yourself, when the truth won't speak, what's really hiding in the silence? This is 33 North Carolina mysteries that cannot be explained. Before we dive in, hit subscribe if you love disappearing trails, unsolved files, and stories that whisper long after midnight. This channel's all about the mysteries that don't want to be solved. While you're here, tell me in the comments, where are you listening from, and what time is it right now? Because if you're hearing this after dark, you're exactly where you're supposed to be. Brown mountain lights. Some mysteries don't whisper. They glow, hover, drift across a dark ridge like they're trying to be noticed, and then vanish the moment someone decides they're real. The brown mountain lights have been doing this little trick for well over a century. Maybe longer if you believe the Cherokee stories. Maybe forever if you believe the mountain's alive. Brown Mountain is an unremarkable bump in western North Carolina's Linville Gorge. It doesn't have the dramatic cliffs of the Rockies or the spiritual fanfare of Sedona, but what it does have are lights. Small, floating, color-shifting orbs that appear in the night sky with no warning and no cause. They pulse, they shimmer. Sometimes they shoot upward before dissolving like smoke. Other times, they hover in a lonely, unnatural stillness, staring back like they're the ones watching you. Locals have watched them for generations. Railroad workers in the early 1902 gave the lights their first media debut, claiming to see lanterns in the sky while hiking through the valley after dusk. They assumed they were campfires from hikers until the lights rose 30 feet off the ground, passed through a tree, and vanished without sound. It wasn't just the workers. Hunters saw them. Fishermen. Park rangers. No consistent time. No consistent weather. But always the same behavior. Lights that seem sentient and stubbornly unexplained. The earliest documented mention goes back to an 1833 newspaper clipping, where a surveyor noted peculiar luminous phenomena above the mountains. He assumed they were swamp gas, which is impressive considering there are no swamps up there, but sure gas with a flair for aerial choreography. By the early 20th century, the government stepped in. Locals were understandably nervous that strange lights in the sky might mean something ominous, foreign tech, military activity, or worse, a sign of some long-forgotten land spirit waking up. So in 1913, the U.S. Geological Survey sent a man named D.B. Sterrett to get to the bottom of it. Sterrett's conclusion? It was just distant train headlights. The glow was a perfectly normal reflection from the Southern Railway line. Problem is, the lights didn't stop when the trains did. So in 1922, the feds sent another team. This time, they were serious. They camped, they tracked atmospheric conditions, they ruled out car lights, moonlight, marsh gas, static discharge, even hoaxes. The verdict? Unresolved, though they suggested somewhat awkwardly it might still just be reflected locomotive light under certain weather conditions, which is bureaucrat for, we have no idea, and we're tired of being up here. Meanwhile, the lights continued. Year after year, people would stake out overlooks with lawn chairs, hoping for a glimpse. Some waited hours and saw nothing. Others saw glowing orbs weaving through trees like they were playing hide-and-seek with gravity. A few saw them up close, so close they swore the lights emitted a low hum, like something biological or maybe mechanical. Today, they've become both a tourist attraction and a local in-joke. There's even a viewing platform set up near the Blue Ridge Parkway. On a good night, you might catch the lights darting across the valley like drunken fireflies. On a bad night, you sit in the cold darkness with 30 other people whispering ghost stories into paper coffee cups. And speaking of ghost stories, there are plenty of those. One says the lights are the spirits of a murdered woman and her lantern-carrying husband, doomed to search for each other forever. Another says they're Native American warriors, reliving an ancient battle with each burst of light. A third claims the mountain was cursed during a blood feud no one remembers, and the lights are the curse personified. But here's the uncomfortable bit. Scientists have tried everything. Radar, seismographs, infrared cameras. No pattern, no heat signature, nothing detectable. It's not military. It's not wildlife. It's not geology. There's no consistent electromagnetic field, no measurable light source, no signal to trace. It's like trying to pin down a dream using math. And that's the thing. The Brown Mountain lights don't feel like a glitch in nature. They feel intentional. They behave too smartly to be random, and too randomly to be smart. They're like the universe leaving breadcrumbs just far enough apart that no one can follow the trail. So people speculate. Maybe it's quantum. Maybe it's interdimensional. Maybe the lights are alive, or worse, maybe they're a message. But from who? And why here, over this one hill in the middle of rural North Carolina? Because despite all the stories and photos and thermal cameras, no one's ever caught one. No one's touched one. No one knows what they are. They don't appear on radar. They don't leave physical evidence. They just show up, float around, and leave. Like they're watching, waiting, learning. But Brown Mountain has more than lights. Just 80 miles east, another mystery once emerged from the sea, abandoned, intact, and missing everyone on board. A real ship, with no one steering. Carol A. Ghost ship. On the morning of the 31st of October, 1921, yes, Halloween, because, of course, it was a fully rigged 5-masted schooner appeared off the coast of North Carolina, like something out of a fever dream or a gothic novel that overslept into real life. The ship's name was Carol A.D. Earring, but locals would come to call it something else entirely, the ghost ship of the Outer Banks. She was found run aground on Diamond Shoals, a notorious stretch of sandbars near Cape Hatteras, often referred to as the graveyard of the Atlantic. That nickname is not metaphor. Hundreds of ships have met their end there, ripped apart by hidden shoals and shifting currents. But the Deering was different. She wasn't torn to pieces. She wasn't burning. She wasn't even sinking. She was pristine, silent, empty. The ship sat awkwardly on the sandbar, tilted like she'd been set down there deliberately by some hand that didn't care much for explanations. Her sails were up, flapping listlessly in the wind. The galley showed signs of a recent meal, mid-preparation. The crew's personal effects were gone, but only selectively. The lifeboats were missing, so was the logbook. But oddly, the navigation equipment was still there. And the Deering wasn't some sketchy backwater tugboat with a few rum barrels and a questionable manifest. She was a modern, well-equipped schooner built in 1919, less than 2 years before her vanishing. She had just finished delivering a load of coal to Brazil and was on her way home. She had a captain, a first mate, and a crew of at least 10 men, all accounted for. Until they weren't. When the Coast Guard finally boarded her 2 days after she grounded, they found nothing. No bodies, no blood, no signs of a struggle, no sign of life at all, not even rats. The kind of sterile silence that feels scripted. Authorities launched an immediate investigation, federal, mind you, not just some sleepy local sheriff poking at barnacles. The Department of Justice got involved. So did the Navy. They followed every breadcrumb they could find. But here's where it starts to feel like someone's toying with the plot. None of the possible explanations made sense. Was it a mutiny? Maybe. The first mate had reportedly clashed with the captain in Barbados, even telling someone he'd do him in. But if there was a mutiny, why abandon the ship? Why leave behind a perfectly functional vessel just a few days from safe harbor? Was it pirates? Not the swashbuckling Hollywood type, but the early 20th century kind, who didn't wear eyeliner or care much for drama. They'd been active in the area, but pirates take things. They don't make a habit of vanishing crews and skipping the spoils. Some thought it might have been a storm, but there were no storms reported in that area on those dates. The ship itself showed no signs of weather damage. Other theories got stranger. Soviet agents, secret prohibition smugglers, a rogue wave, a mechanical failure that caused panic. One theory even suggested that the ship was taken over by a group of communists. Because apparently, in 1921, the most logical explanation for any unsolved event was communists did it. Then there were the more exotic suggestions. Some locals believed the Deering was lured onto the shoals by ghost lights, similar to the Brown Mountain ones, but coastal. Others claimed the ship passed through a thin place in the fabric of reality, causing its crew to step into a different dimension. Some said the men were taken. By what? No one seemed willing to clarify. Just taken. Like the sea decided it was tired of giving things back. The Coast Guard eventually gave up. The official conclusion? Abandonment, which is a polite way of saying, we don't know, and we don't want to keep spending money on this. The ship itself didn't last. A storm broke her back weeks later, scattering her timbers into the sea like bones tossed from a dinner table. Some were salvaged, some lost forever. The crew was never found. No wreckage, no notes in bottles, no mysterious footprints on distant shores. Just a silence that refuses to age. And if that wasn't enough to haunt you, let's not forget the meal left mid-preparation. Not rotting, not burned, just waiting, as if someone had been called away. Not in a rush, just momentarily, like they'd be back in 5 minutes. Like the sea itself whispered something urgent, and they leaned over the railing to listen. But nothing answers back out there. Only wind and tide. And yet, North Carolina has a knack for strange precipitation too, not just vanishing people and haunted waters. Because in 1884, something fell from the sky in Chatham County that still defies explanation. And it wasn't rain. 2 mysteries in, and we've barely scratched the surface. If your brain's already buzzing and your lights are staying on tonight, go ahead and subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. And tell me, where are you listening from? And what time is it? Midnight in the mountains? 3 a.m. in a city that never sleeps? I want to know who else is out there, wide awake with questions. Blood shower of Chatham County, 1884. The storm came in like any other. Quiet at first, damp and expectant. The kind of soft, humid tension North Carolina knows how to conjure where the sky feels like it's holding its breath, and the leaves stop rustling as if they've overheard something terrible. It was the 25th of February, 1884, in Chatham County, when the clouds opened over the farm of a man named W.H. Alston. What came down wasn't rain, not water, not sleet, not mud. It was blood. And we're not being metaphorical here. This isn't a dramatic retelling of red clay runoff or a rust-colored drizzle caught in the morning light. This was actual blood, confirmed by multiple eyewitnesses, neighbors, farmers, even local officials. They said it splattered the ground, painted the fence posts, soaked into the soil. Some accounts say flesh-like tissue fell with it. Others describe a kind of sticky red mist, drifting down like confetti at a deeply unsettling celebration. The newspapers didn't know what to make of it. The Raleigh News and Observer ran the story with a tone of disbelief laced with quiet dread, and then it spread from town gossip to statewide fascination. Before long, word reached Washington, D.C. Specimens were gathered, allegedly, and here's where the whole thing takes a sharp left into mystery. The samples were sent to scientists for testing specifically, a chemist named Francis P. Venable at the University of North Carolina. He reportedly confirmed that it was blood, animal blood. No further identification, no theory, no source, just blood. From somewhere. The obvious theories came first, because they always do. Could it have been a flock of injured birds overhead? A buzzard explosion? That's not sarcasm. One theory posited that a group of vultures had overeaten, panicked in midair, and expelled their stomach contents en masse, which would be almost comforting, in a grotesque way. At least it would be something. But the problem with that theory, besides how deeply unappetizing it is that the blood fell in a defined area, and in a pattern. It wasn't random. It didn't spatter like something dropped from above. It fell softly, evenly, as if it had rained straight down. There were no feathers, no beaks, no bones. Just the substance itself, in an otherwise cloudless sky. It happened in the morning, too, not during a thunderstorm, not during any reported meteorological anomaly. In fact, the only real anomaly was what came after the fall. The birds stopped singing. Local livestock avoided the area. The land, people said, felt wrong. The blood-soaked spot refused to grow grass for months, according to some. It was as if whatever touched the earth had leached something out of it. Local folklore spiraled quickly. Some whispered that it was a biblical omen, a sign of divine wrath, or a harbinger of death. Others pointed to native legends, claiming the area had once been sacred, or cursed, or both. Some said it was witchcraft. Others swore it was the devil passing through, marking the land in his usual subtle way. The national scientific community didn't bite, or, perhaps more accurately, didn't want to be caught looking like they'd bitten. The Smithsonian gave a brief shrug. The Weather Bureau didn't respond. And so, the whole thing dissolved into the kind of story that lives in old clippings and uncomfortable silences. But here's what sticks. No one ever explained it. Not then, not now. No repeat events, no matching reports. Just that one morning in 1884, when a man walked out to his farm and looked up, only to be rained on by something red, something warm, something that science could identify, but not understand. People today say it was probably just vultures, that were overcomplicating a random, grotesque event with unnecessary mysticism. But that doesn't account for the weather, or the pattern, or the long-standing quiet that followed. Why did the animals avoid the land? Why did the neighbors, decades later, still speak of the air around the place like it carried weight? Or maybe it's just that human minds can't stand unexplained phenomena. When faced with something irrational, we scramble to stuff it into a labeled box, even if that box is absurd. So we say vultures and sleep a little better. But not everything falls from the sky as it should. Not everything that drops from above belongs here. And in North Carolina, the ground doesn't just get marked, it remembers. Especially near the water, because just 17 years later, another young woman vanished near a river not far from there. And this time, the mystery came with a body, a suspect, and over a century of questions no one could answer. Disappearance of Nell Cropsey. Elizabeth Eleanor Cropsey. Nell, to everyone who knew her, was the kind of young woman who made people in 1901 pause mid-sentence. Sharp-minded, proud. A face that stayed in people's memories longer than it should have. Her family called her principled. The newspapers would later call her striking, and the town of Elizabeth City, North Carolina, simply called her gone. What happened to Nell Cropsey is one of those stories that lives in layers, rumors piled on top of facts, then pressed down by decades of unsatisfying conclusions. The only thing that's ever been agreed on is this. She stepped out of her house on the 20th of November, 1901, and didn't come back. The Cropsey family had moved from New York to Elizabeth City a few years earlier. They were well off, educated, and out-of-towners, which made them both respected and suspicious, depending on who you asked. Their house sat right on the Pasquotank River, elegant and imposing, with a porch that overlooked the water and windows that never quite stayed shut in the wind. Nell was 19, courted, watched, and constantly talked about, especially by a young man named Jim Wilcox. Wilcox was the son of the local sheriff, which meant he came with both privilege and eyes on his back. He'd been seeing Nell for over 2 years by that point, but their relationship had grown strained. He was brooding and evasive. She was fiery and increasingly impatient. In the weeks leading up to her disappearance, there were whispered arguments, the kind that spill through closed windows when the air is humid enough. That night, the 20th of November, Jim came over. He asked Nell to step outside. Just a word, just a moment. She didn't take her coat. Her sister, Olive, was the last to see her. She heard voices on the porch, then a strange sound, like a scuffle, or perhaps nothing at all, depending on whose version you believe. And then, silence. Nell didn't come back inside. Not in 10 minutes. Not by midnight. Not the next morning. The search began almost immediately. Her family panicked. The town organized. Volunteers combed the woods and dragged the river, assuming what small towns always assume when something terrible happens. It must have been an outsider. But no one saw strangers that night. No one heard a carriage. There were no footprints, no signs of struggle, just a missing girl and a locked mystery box where the truth should have been. Jim Wilcox was questioned, naturally, but his answers were vague. He claimed they'd spoken, she'd cried, he left. That's it. Just a sad conversation on the porch and then, poof. The community didn't buy it. Neither did the newspapers. The Cropseys were devastated, of course, but they were also connected. The case reached New York, then Washington. President Roosevelt was even rumored to have taken a personal interest. Weeks passed, then months. And then, on the 27th of December, 37 days later, Nell was found. Her body had been floating in the Pasquotank River, not far from her home, face turned away, as if the river itself had decided it was finally time to give something back. The coroner's report was inconclusive. No obvious signs of what happened. No injuries that could say definitively what ended her story. Some said she must have fallen. Others whispered darker things. A few still insisted it was suicide, which the family flatly denied. Jim Wilcox was arrested again, this time for murder. He was tried, convicted, then sentenced to death. Then, because North Carolina justice moves like a weather vane in hurricane season, his sentence was commuted to life in prison, and then, after 15 years, he was pardoned, released. Free to walk the same streets where Nell once lived. He never confessed, never clarified, never changed his story. And the town? It never forgot. To this day, the Cropsey house still stands. Some say it's haunted. A few claim to have seen Nell at the windows. Others just say the air around the porch feels heavy, like unfinished business clings to the railings. Theories abound, of course. That Jim did it. That someone else did. That she never died at all, but vanished into a second life elsewhere, though that one falls apart under even light scrutiny. The only thing that doesn't crumble is the absence itself. The raw, impossible void she left behind. Maybe the worst part of unresolved tragedies is not the silence, it's the echo. People still walk by that house and look at the river, still wonder what happened on that porch, still see her name in the old newspaper clippings and feel the way the story won't settle. Because Nell didn't just vanish, she became a question no one could comfortably answer. And even in death, she didn't offer a solution, only a space where truth should be. Just like another light, seen not far south of there, that still returns again and again, always promising clarity, and always ending in smoke. Mako Light. The tracks are gone now, buried under sand, weeds, and the long shadows of memory. But the stories still linger, like they're waiting for the next train that will never come. Out in Mako, North Carolina, just a quiet stretch southwest of Wilmington, people once gathered at night to see a light that shouldn't exist. Not metaphor, not folklore, a literal light. A lantern, swinging invisibly down the abandoned railroad line, as if carried by someone no longer alive and not quite gone. They called it the Mako light. It wasn't rare. It wasn't subtle. It was just there. Some nights it would flicker like a signal. Other times it would rush toward the onlookers, a single orb of pale, floating fire, always silent, always slightly wrong, and always disappearing just before you could get close. The legend is straightforward, almost too straightforward, which makes it worse. Back in the late 1800s, a brakeman named Joe Baldwin was working the Wilmington and Manchester Railroad. One night, something went wrong. Either his train detached from the rest of the cars, or another train was barreling toward his from the opposite direction. Depends on who's telling it. But the detail everyone agrees on is this: Joe stayed behind, waving his lantern to warn the oncoming train. It didn't stop, and ever since then, the light returned. To some, it was a ghost. Joe, still dutiful, still trying to prevent a wreck that had already happened. To others, it was residual energy trauma baked into the land, like heat trapped in stone. A few, naturally, blamed swamp gas, misidentified headlights, or temperature inversions. You know, the usual greatest hits of rational dismissal. But those theories fell apart every time someone stood on the tracks and watched the light bobbing toward them like it was being held by someone with an unhurried limp. It was visible for decades. Newspapers documented it. Rail workers tried to follow it. Entire families would drive out at night and wait for it, picnic style, like it was some eerie firefly show put on for free by the cosmos. The Atlantic Coastline Railroad investigated it more than once. So did amateur scientists, ghost hunters, and at least 24 photographers with varying levels of success. They all agreed on one thing: it was real, and yet it didn't belong. In the 1942nd and 52nd, sightings peaked. Hundreds claimed to see the Mako light. It came in different colors: white, red, occasionally green, but always the same basic pattern. A glowing ball of light swinging from side to side along the same stretch of track, as if Joe's invisible hand still gripped the handle, moving through motions he could no longer escape. But here's the twist. The light didn't just stay in one spot. People swore it, chased cars, veered into woods, blinked out midair. Some said it responded to shouts. Others claimed it paused, as if watching the watchers. One woman told reporters in 1962 that the light floated right through her windshield and disappeared inside the car. She never drove out there again. And then, quiet. In the 1972nd, the railroad finally pulled up the last sections of track. Freight traffic had shifted. Mako became just another dot on the map, bypassed by modernity. And almost as if obeying a signal no one else could hear, the light began to fade. Not vanish entirely, just retreat. Appearances became rarer, less consistent. The people who claimed to see it became older, fewer, more cautious in their certainty. Some say the removal of the tracks broke the spell. Others think the story simply ran out of believers, like an old myth getting tired of performing. There are still sightings, now and then. Local kids sneak out, trying to record something. Paranormal YouTubers have uploaded shaky night vision videos with titles like "Real Ghost Train Light?" But the Mako light doesn't seem interested in going viral. Maybe that's part of the point. Maybe it was never meant for mass consumption. Maybe it was just an echo one man's duty so strong that it burned itself into the dark like a candle that refuses to die. Or maybe it was a warning. A quiet signal from a place that knows the cost of time repeating itself. Because Joe wasn't the only spirit said to walk that land, and the Mako light wasn't the only unexplained boom echoing through the night. Just a few counties north, they don't have lights. They have thunder. Thunder from nowhere. Without lightning, without clouds. Just sound, roaring out of the sea and shaking the earth like it remembers something the rest of us forgot. Devil's Tramping Ground. Deep in the pine-stitched woods of Chatham County, where the air hangs humid and secrets rot slowly beneath the underbrush, there's a place that no map really wants to explain. It's not large, it's not flashy. Just a dusty, circular patch of bare earth about 40 feet across, where nothing grows, nothing stays, and no one lingers longer than they should. Locals call it the Devil's Tramping Ground, which, if we're being honest, is probably the most straightforward part of the whole thing. The story goes like this. For as long as anyone can remember, there's been a perfect circle in the middle of the woods where no vegetation grows. Grass refuses, trees stop short. Even weeds avoid it, which is frankly impressive in North Carolina, where weeds usually grow inside concrete if given an hour of sunlight. But that's not the weird part. The weird part is what happens if you leave something there overnight. Chairs, blankets, tools, tents, dogs, people. It doesn't matter. By morning, whatever was left inside the circle will be moved, knocked over, dragged just a little to the side, or simply gone. Not stolen, not destroyed. Just removed, like the place itself is allergic to permanence. There are hundreds of local accounts of this happening. Campers waking up outside their tents, dogs refusing to cross the circle's edge, rocks that won't stay where they're placed. Even when people deliberately try to defy the space, dig holes, pour concrete, drop heavy equipment, the results are always the same. The ground reverts. The circle stays clean, unyielding, stubbornly untouched by time or logic. So the legend grew. People say the devil himself uses the spot to walk in circles at night, pacing furiously, wearing down the soil as he plans new evils for the world. Hence the name, Tramping Ground. Others say it's a portal, a cursed relic, a battlefield between angels and demons forever scorched by the war, or maybe a place where the laws of nature briefly looked away. Old-timers will tell you the Cherokee avoided the area, that they spoke of spirits trapped in the land, that it was a place to be respected, not explored. And while much of that is tangled in the usual folklore fog, it's true that the area has long been regarded with caution by those who live nearby. Skeptics, naturally, have tried to file it all under science. Soil analysis was conducted multiple times. The results, unhelpfully vague. Some say the ground has high salt or copper levels, making it inhospitable to plants. Others argue that the soil is no different than the surrounding area. Still others found no consistent anomaly at all, just a stubborn refusal of growth without chemical cause. One study noted that the compactness of the soil in the circle was unusually dense, which might explain the lack of growth, but not the movement of objects, not the decades of perfectly rounded edges, not the pattern of the place like someone has been walking that path over and over, burning a ring into the earth with footsteps no one sees. Some tried to debunk it altogether. Maybe people trample it at night, they said. Maybe it's just folklore erosion. And yet, somehow, year after year, no tracks are ever found. And here's the stranger part. Electronics don't behave well in the circle. Cameras glitch, batteries drain, audio cuts out. Not always, but enough to be noticed, enough to unsettle. One local team once tried to live stream a 24-hour stay at the site. Their equipment failed at 2:13 a.m. sharp. No storm, no signal interference, just a sudden blackout. When they checked the footage the next day, the recording stopped mid-frame. No error, just absence. Naturally, theories have spiraled out of control. Paranormal rifts, electromagnetic vortices, a failed experiment from a forgotten Cold War project. Some say the circle is aligned with ancient ley lines. Others point to geological fault lines. A few mention UFO sightings nearby, and some simply mutter, "Don't go out there after dark." Which, to be fair, is probably the most useful advice. Because even if you don't believe in the devil or energy fields, or folklore, or the stubborn will of cursed dirt, there's still something deeply off about standing in the circle. The silence is heavier, the shadows longer. Your thoughts don't echo quite right. It feels like something's waiting for you to step just a little too far in. And if you do, who knows? You might just end up hearing something, like a faint boom, echoing through the night sky, miles from the sea. A sound that shouldn't be there. A sound like distant thunder, without a storm, without warning, without explanation. Seneca guns. Along the ragged edge of North Carolina's coast, the Atlantic doesn't always whisper. Sometimes it speaks with thunder. Except there's no storm, no lightning, no waves big enough to shake windows, no planes breaking the sound barrier, no cannon fire, no fireworks, nothing at all. Just a boom. A deep, thunderous, window-rattling, gut-vibrating boom that echoes inland for miles. And then, silence. These sounds are called the Seneca guns, a name borrowed from a similar mystery up north, but made truly legendary by the North Carolina coast, where the guns seem to fire more often, louder, and with even less patience for logic. The phenomenon goes back generations. Long before there were highways slicing through the pines or tourists clogging the Outer Banks with coolers and bodyboards, people were hearing it. Native tribes spoke of sky thunder that came without clouds. Settlers wrote about the sky cannons in letters home. And by the time newspapers started printing in the 1802nd, the Seneca guns had already become one of the South's favorite unsolved problems. In 1850, none other than James Fenimore Cooper, the guy who gave us The Last of the Mohicans, published a full essay about these mystery booms, trying to make sense of them. He had heard them himself while visiting Seneca Lake in New York, but coastal Carolinians were quick to point out that their version was louder, more frequent, more unsettling, and more impossible to explain. Let's get one thing straight. These aren't subtle little pops in the distance. They're full-body shocks. People describe them like distant artillery, or the kind of sonic thump you feel when a plane breaks the sound barrier overhead but with no visible cause. You step outside, expecting a storm rolling in from the east. But there's no cloud cover. Just blue sky. Just sunshine. Just birds. And even they seem startled by what just happened. The booms rattle doors. They shake cups on shelves. They send locals and tourists alike out into their yards, looking up at the empty sky and wondering if something just exploded somewhere. And nothing ever has. People have called in gas line concerns, assuming something blew up underground. They've called 911, convinced there's been an earthquake. The U.S. Geological Survey gets pinged almost every time one of these blasts occurs. Their response? No seismic activity, no epicenter, no movement underground, just sound, just vibration. Just the guns. So what causes them? Depends on how hard you're willing to squint. Theory number 1, atmospheric conditions. Some scientists claim that under specific conditions, temperature inversions, especially sound, can travel farther and behave unpredictably. A small bang hundreds of miles away might, under the right conditions, reach your town as a loud explosion. Maybe it's distant thunder, maybe it's a distant mine or explosion you'll never hear about. That's the safe, polite explanation. Except, in many cases, there's no source sound to trace, no lightning storms within range, no mining, no naval activity, just the boom, just the impact, no origin. Theory number 2, underwater landslides. The ocean floor isn't always stable. A sudden slip along the continental shelf could send a shock wave upward, creating a deep rumbling noise. But again, no one's found any actual underwater evidence. No new canyons, no seismic readings, just speculation. Theory number 3, methane explosions from the seabed. Methane pockets could theoretically build pressure and erupt underwater, causing a concussive sound wave. But this too leaves no debris, no churning, no change in water clarity, and it certainly doesn't explain why the phenomenon occurs inland, far from the shoreline. Which brings us to theory number 4, the weird ones. Because this is where the locals and longtime observers start saying things in hushed tones. They talk about patterns, about certain times of year when the booms get louder. Some say they coincide with military tests, except when the military says nothing happened. Others wonder about old munitions dumps, forgotten submarine wrecks, strange electromagnetic pulses. A few whisper that it's something deeper. Not metaphorically, literally deeper. Something beneath the ocean floor. Something old. Not alive in the way we understand it, but aware. Like the earth occasionally shifts not to break, but to speak. The sound, in this version of the story, is not a glitch in the atmosphere. It's communication, or warning, or memory. Of course, none of this is provable. That's the point. The Seneca guns don't leave clues. They don't follow rules. They just announce themselves, at random, like a drumbeat in a song only the coast can hear. And then, they vanish. The Navy doesn't know. NASA doesn't know. Local scientists don't know. And after all these decades, maybe it's not a question science can answer. Because maybe it's not just about pressure waves and fault lines. Maybe the coast is haunted in a different way. Not by spirits, but by moments. Loud, impossible moments that can't be explained because they weren't supposed to happen here in the first place. But if strange booms echoing from the sea aren't unsettling enough, then travel inland, toward the Cape Fear River, where something even stranger was once reported by soldiers. Not a ghost, not a gun, a mermaid. Or maybe something trying very hard to look like one. Mermaids at Mermaid's Point. Just upstream from where the Cape Fear River opens its mouth to the Atlantic, there's a quiet bend in the water that locals have always eyed a little differently. It's a place where the trees don't lean quite right, where fog hugs the river longer than it should, and where fish jump at odd times like they're reacting to something below the surface, not above it. They call it Mermaid's Point. And if you've spent any time digging through Revolutionary War-era letters and military reports in North Carolina, you'll find that tucked between all the usual mentions of troop movements, gunpowder rations, and battlefield illnesses, there are a few stranger entries, personal ones, almost embarrassed, as if the writers couldn't quite believe what they were recording, but they wrote it anyway. Because men stationed along the Cape Fear River in the late 1702nd claimed to have seen something in the water. Something human, but not. According to several surviving reports, there were sightings of pale figures swimming just beneath the surface of the river, surfacing only briefly before slipping under again. Some soldiers described long hair. Others swore they saw faces beautiful at a distance, but somehow wrong. The descriptions vary, but the tone is always the same. Awe, followed by confusion, followed by a kind of quiet dread. One account dated 1779 and attributed to a private stationed near modern-day Fayetteville claims that 3 men on patrol heard what they thought was singing coming from the river. Not birdsong, not frogs. Singing. Human voices, high and strange, with no words they could recognize. When they approached the waterline, the singing stopped. What they saw, according to the report, was a head just above the water, eyes that locked with theirs, and then gone. Another report, 2 years later, came from a merchant ship docked upriver. The crew claimed to have seen 2 figures in the moonlight, frolicking like sea creatures, but possessing the limbs and faces of women. The word frolicking is doing a lot of heavy lifting here. The captain's log noted that the sight caused 3 men to jump overboard, either to follow or flee. No one could decide which. Now, we could chalk this up to hallucinations, rum and boredom. Frontier life was harsh. Men isolated for long stretches developed all kinds of strange fixations. But the Mermaid's Point stories are stubborn. They don't fade. They repeat. And what's worse, some say they never stopped. Even into the 20th century, there were whispers. A fisherman in the 1932nd claimed that his nets kept getting cut by something with small, sharp claws. A biologist from Raleigh came to investigate and left with no answers, just a note in his journal about unidentifiable animal traces and a request not to be contacted about it further. By the 1952nd, teenagers had adopted the site for the usual rituals: dare games, campfires, late-night skinny dips. But more than one group reported hearing voices at the edge of the water, especially just before sunrise. A few claimed they saw glowing shapes moving below the surface, fast and smooth, like dolphins. If dolphins had hands. The area was eventually fenced off by a private landowner. He claimed it was to protect an endangered plant species, but those who live nearby say it had more to do with what he saw one night while checking his property. He never spoke about it directly, just put up a fence, sold the land 5 years later, and moved inland. So what are the mermaids of Mermaid's Point? Let's roll through the usual suspects. Manatees? The coast is too cold. Otters? Possibly until you read the first-hand accounts. Some say it was just women swimming late at night, but again, multiple witnesses describe inhuman movement, gills, webbed hands, features that looked beautiful from far away, but seemed to distort as they drew closer, like looking through warped glass. Which leaves us with the folkloric explanations. Mermaids. True mermaids aren't the singing princesses we turn them into. In older cultures, they're omens, harbingers, dangerous. Sometimes they lure, sometimes they warn. But they're never just there for aesthetics. If something that resembles a human is living in a river and doesn't want to be found, the implication isn't magic, it's territory. Some believe they're not mermaids at all, but a kind of ancient river, being older than the colonies, older than the tribes, older than language, something that mimicked us over time. Learned how to resemble us just well enough to keep us curious, just poorly enough to keep us afraid. Today, the sightings are rare. The river still bends there, still carries fog, still keeps its secrets. People drive past it without noticing. Hikers mark it as just another scenic overlook. But a few locals, those who've lived long enough and listened hard enough, still leave small offerings on the bank. Coins, bits of ribbon, shells. Not because they believe, but because they remember. And some memories are best left undisturbed, especially when the river starts to sing. But inland, in the thick woods of Bladen County, there was something else stirring during the winter of 1953. Something that didn't swim, didn't speak, and didn't resemble anything human. Something with claws, a taste for livestock, and absolutely no interest in being understood. Beast of Bladenboro. The winter of 1953 Bladenboro, North Carolina, was cold, not just in temperature, but in tone, a different kind of cold. The kind that settles in people's bones when something moves through their town that they can't name, can't stop, and can't quite believe. That January, a small, quiet farming community found itself caught in a slow-building panic. Something was killing animals, not just killing them, hunting them, slipping past fences, vanishing into the woods, leaving behind just enough evidence to make people afraid, but never enough to bring any clarity. At first, it was just a few dogs, mauled, with their necks crushed, drained of blood. Then it was livestock, goats, calves, even a few pigs, always at night, always without a sound. The bodies were found in the morning, limp and disturbingly intact, with almost surgical precision. The local police chief at the time, Roy Forres, was skeptical at first, thought it was probably a coyote or a pack of feral dogs, nothing unusual for a rural area, until he saw the tracks. Huge, far too large for a dog, too rounded for a bobcat, too wide for a panther. Clawed prints deep in the mud spaced in a way that suggested something big, heavy, deliberate. Whatever it wasn't running wild, it was stalking. And then people started hearing things. Growls in the trees, shrill cries in the distance, low, heavy breathing outside bedroom windows, Stories spread fast in small towns, especially when they smell like truth. And before long, the legend of the Beast of Bladenboro was born. By the first week of January, the entire town was on edge. Kids were kept home from school. Farmers refused to go out after dark. Men with rifles sat on porches, waiting, hoping, dreading. Hunting parties formed, some led by police, others just angry groups of civilians determined to kill whatever it was. More than 500 hunters, armed and restless, combed the woods. They found nothing. No blood trail, no fur, just more crushed bodies, more fear. The descriptions from eyewitnesses didn't help either. Some claimed it looked like a large cat, panther-like, dark, fast, with glowing eyes. Others said it moved on 4 legs, but seemed almost human in how it watched. It was quiet, too quiet, always vanishing just before anyone got a clear look. One woman reported seeing it from her porch, said it was about 3 feet long, bushy, and low to the ground, with a face like a cat but eyes like a person. Another said she heard her dogs yelping, and when she ran outside, she saw a shadow leap over her fence without touching the top. Chief Flores, to his credit, tried to keep the panic under control, but the situation escalated. People were bringing in blood-soaked pets. The town's phone lines were jammed. Newspaper headlines screamed things like, "Vampire Beast Terrorizes Town." By mid-January, Bladenboro had become national news. And then just as suddenly as it had started, the killing stopped. No final showdown, no big reveal, no confirmed sighting, just silence. The woods grew quiet again. The fences stopped breaking. The animals stopped dying. Chief Forrest later claimed they had caught and killed a large bobcat and believed that was the culprit. He paraded the carcass through town for everyone to see, but no one truly believed it. The tracks didn't match. The injuries didn't match. The timeline didn't match. The fear didn't leave. Some locals suspected a rogue exotic animal escaped from a traveling circus or a private collection. A few suggested a government experiment gone wrong, an animal bred for war or surveillance that slipped its leash. Others leaned on the supernatural. They said the beast was a shapeshifter, a warning, a protector turned angry, a legend that rose from the swamps to remind the town it was being watched. The legend of the Beast of Bladenboro never really died. Sightings have been reported sporadically over the years. Strange prints, distant howls, pets gone missing in the night. In 2008, a man claimed to have seen something stalking his backyard, with eyes that glowed in his flashlight like red coals. Today, the town leans into the legend. There's a Beast Fest every year. T-shirts, stickers, shadowy mascots, the usual ritual of turning fear into folklore. But beneath the jokes and parades, there's still that edge, that unease, because nothing was ever really solved. No one ever proved what the beast was, or where it went, or why it came in the first place. And if a creature could move through a town that quietly, that efficiently leave that kind of chaos behind, it's worth wondering, was it really an animal at all? Or something pretending to be? Not the first time either, because in the Uwharrie National Forest, strange figures have been seen for decades. Tall ones, hairy ones, with eyes that don't blink, and footsteps that don't bother to hide. Cryptids of NC, Bigfoot in Uwharrie. In the Uwharrie National Forest, the trees grow old and close together, crooked pine and oak crowding over the narrow paths like they're listening to your footsteps. The forest floor is soft, with decades of leaf decay, and the air smells like time itself, rich, rotting, and quiet. Too quiet sometimes. It's the kind of place that feels heavy with its own history. People go into Uwharrie to camp, to hunt, to get away from the world, but some come out changed, shaken, unsure of what they saw or what saw them. For decades now, this stretch of central North Carolina has quietly become one of the state's most consistent hotspots for one of the most famously unprovable creatures in American folklore, Bigfoot. Yes, that Bigfoot. Tall, hair-covered, vaguely ape-like, equal parts predator and mystery, and yet, also, somehow, something more. The stories coming out of Uwharrie don't start with blurry photos or tourist gossip. They start with sounds, bone-deep howls echoing through the trees long after midnight. Knocking noises, two sharp cracks of wood against wood, answered from deeper in the forest. Not random, rhythmic, like a signal, like something testing the woods to see if anything replies. Hunters hear it first, then hikers, then campers. Most people dismiss it until it happens again, louder, closer. One of the earliest widely circulated reports came in the 1972nd when a group of Boy Scouts hiking near Big Island Creek claimed to see a man-shaped thing standing still among the trees. Too tall to be a person, too broad to be a bear. It watched them. Then it turned and vanished into the forest with unnatural silence. No rustling, no footsteps, just gone. In the early 2002nd, a man living near the park boundary reported finding enormous tracks in the muddy edge of his property after a rainy night. Not just big wrong, the prints looked humanoid, but off. Too long in the middle. The toes spread wider than human anatomy allows. And most disturbing of all, they were in a single file line, one directly in front of the other. No animal does that. But the most unsettling accounts don't involve sightings or sounds. They involve presence, a deep, irrational sense of being watched, of something just out of sight. People describe the feeling like a pressure in their chest, or the certainty that if they turn around, they'll see something they can't forget. And every once in a while, someone does turn around. The sightings aren't consistent in detail, but they are in tone. Something tall, 7 to 9 feet, covered in dark fur, shoulders like barrels, a face that seems intelligent, but ancient. Not an animal, not a person, something caught between. Skeptics, of course, have a field day. It's bears, they say. It's moonlight and shadows, and the overactive imagination of people too deep in the woods. But Uwharrie isn't a place where things are easily explained away. The forest is dense, the cell signal is non-existent, and the geography plays tricks on you. Echoes move sideways, shapes flicker. Time feels unstable. Even seasoned rangers have had to admit, strange things happen here. And there's audio evidence, if you go looking. Recordings of screams and howls unlike any known wildlife in the area. Low rumbles that rise into shrieks far too long, too complex, too deliberate to be coyotes or foxes. Researchers from the Bigfoot Field Researchers Organization, yes, it exists, have logged multiple Class A sightings in the Uwharrie region, meaning visual encounters with no evidence of hoax or misidentification. But beyond the pop culture image of Bigfoot, the version in these woods is more elusive, more sentient. Locals don't talk about it like a beast. They talk about it like a guardian or a watcher. Something that's always been here. There are whispers among certain older residents that whatever walks in those woods is tied to older legends, pre-colonial ones. That the native tribes of the region spoke of a creature who lived in the forest, who walked upright, and who only showed itself when the balance of the land was off. A keeper of the quiet, you might say. And then there's the truly strange. Reports of glowing eyes, not reflecting light but generating it, or creatures that seem to blink out instead of walking away. Some theorists, with more imagination than data, claim we're dealing with an interdimensional being, a shape that bleeds into our world only when it wants to. Which begs the real question, what does it want? Because it hasn't attacked. It hasn't made itself known. It just appears, and then disappears. And Uwharrie keeps its secrets. You can walk for days out there without seeing another person. You can sleep under the stars and wake up to find tree branches arranged around your tent in shapes you didn't make. You can follow footprints that seem to go nowhere. You can listen, and sometimes something might listen back. But not everything in North Carolina's ghost files stands tall. Some figures are quiet, slender, almost polite, like the one that haunts Hatteras Island, not with violence, but with warning. Gray Man of Hatteras. At first glance, Hatteras Island doesn't seem like the kind of place that would be haunted. It's all salt breeze and sea oats, a narrow strip of sand suspended between ocean and sound. The light here is sharp, the wind relentless, and the horizon so flat it makes you wonder if the sky and sea were once the same thing before something split them apart. But if you ask the locals, they'll tell you the island remembers things, and sometimes it warns you. That's where the Gray Man comes in. He's not loud. He doesn't appear with thunder or howling winds. No blood, no shadows dragging across the dunes. Just a figure. Pale gray, faint around the edges, seen from a distance, usually just before something terrible happens. The earliest stories date back to the early 1800s, though some claim they stretch further into whispered maritime folklore. Each version follows the same basic shape. Before a devastating hurricane strikes the Outer Banks, someone sees a man walking alone along the beach. He wears old-fashioned clothing, usually described as 19th century coastal garb, though the details vary. A long coat, a wide-brimmed hat, bare feet. The most important detail? He disappears. Always. Without a trace. Sometimes while you're still looking at him. In many cases, the people who report seeing the Gray Man claim they were overcome by an eerie calm. Not fear, exactly more like a warning you feel in your blood. Like some deep, ancestral part of you recognizes that something old has stepped into view, something that knows what's coming. And then, like clockwork, the storm arrives. Not every hurricane brings a sighting, and not every sighting is reported. But enough stories have surfaced over the last 2 centuries that the legend has cemented itself into coastal memory. Some dismiss it as a weather myth, a product of storm season nerves and low visibility, a trick of light against the surf. But others, especially the locals who've lived through enough hurricanes to stop counting, treat the Gray Man as something closer to real. Because here's where it gets strange. In more than a few accounts, the Gray Man doesn't just appear, he intervenes. One of the most famous stories comes from 1899, just before a hurricane tore across Hatteras and destroyed dozens of homes. A woman claimed she saw a man standing in front of her house, motioning to her urgently. She didn't recognize him, but something in his expression terrified her. Not cruelty, urgency. She gathered her children and left immediately. When she returned days later, everything around her home was flattened. Her house was untouched. Another family, in the 1932nd, claimed to see the Gray Man standing in the marshes behind their property. That night, they decided to evacuate inland, even though the storm forecasts weren't severe. They later learned the eye of the storm had shifted unexpectedly directly over their village. Most of the homes were lost. These aren't isolated incidents. Over and over again, the story repeats. Someone sees him, feels an intense, inexplicable need to leave, and later finds out that decision saved their life. He never speaks, never comes closer, just stands there, a faint gray silhouette, watching the tide roll in, like he knows exactly where it's going to land. So who or what is the Gray Man? Theories abound. The most common is that he was a sailor, lost at sea, whose spirit now tries to warn others of the storms that took him. Others say he was a man searching for a lost love killed in a hurricane centuries ago, and now he walks the shores trying to protect others from the same fate. Some point to a specific storm in 1822 as his origin, though no verifiable records match up exactly. And then there are the stranger ideas. That the Gray Man is a kind of coastal guardian, not a ghost but a force, a manifestation of the land's memory. A visual echo sent out like a flare every time the ocean starts pulling too hard at the edge of the world. Some say he isn't a man at all, but a message in human shape. An early warning system, written not in radar, but in shadow. No one has ever photographed him, of course. No videos, no audio, just the stories. Some handed down through families, some scribbled in margins of weather journals, some whispered at gas stations the night before a storm hits. And maybe that's the way he wants it. Unconfirmed, untraceable, just visible enough to save you, if you're paying attention. Because that's the cruel trick of the gray man. You only know he was real after the storm. And while his warnings may save a few, not every ghost on the Carolina coast is so kind. Some still rage, some still haunt, some were pirates in life and something worse in death. And if you ever hear footsteps behind you in the Outer Banks long after the waves have gone still, well, you just might be walking where Blackbeard still treads. Ghost of Blackbeard. Edward Teach, better known as Blackbeard, was a man who understood the value of fear, not just the sword-wielding, cannon-blasting kind, but a deeper, more calculated kind. He lit slow-burning fuses in his beard to surround his face with smoke. He wore a bandolier of pistols, all loaded. He cultivated myth like a modern influencer cultivates brand. And when he finally died violently, in 1718, he didn't go quietly. And apparently, he didn't go far. Blackbeard's death came at the mouth of Ocracoke Inlet, a narrow stretch of sea just off the Outer Banks. After years of piracy, betrayal, and government manipulation, he found himself cornered by British naval forces led by Lieutenant Robert Maynard. The battle was brutal. Blackbeard fought to the bitter end, suffering what historians count as 5 bullet wounds and 20 cuts. His head was chopped off and hung from the bowsprit of Maynard's ship as proof of the kill. His body was dumped into the water where, if the stories are to be believed, it swam around the ship 3 times before sinking. Which seems like the kind of thing that either didn't happen or definitely means something. Because Blackbeard's ghost never left the water. In the centuries since his death, sightings of a strange, bearded apparition have been reported all along the North Carolina coast, from Ocracoke down to Beaufort, and sometimes farther inland than makes any rational sense. And these aren't just fleeting shadows or misty shapes. Witnesses describe a presence, a heavy pressure in the air, the sound of boots sloshing through wet sand when no one's there, the clink of metal on leather, the smell of sulfur and salt, and in the worst cases, the sudden feeling that someone is standing behind you close enough to hear their breath, only to find nothing but fog when you turn. At Teach's Hole, a cove near Ocracoke Island named after him, people claim to see a glowing, headless figure moving just beneath the surface of the water. Not swimming, not floating, walking, as if still patrolling the inlet, angry that his territory was taken, his head displayed like a trophy, his legend reduced to caricature. Fishermen report strange lights beneath their boats. Divers have reported hallucinations, visions of ships burning, laughter in their ears, and in one case, the distinct voice of a man whispering, "You shouldn't be here." It's easy to romanticize pirates now. Hollywood cleaned them up, gave them cheeky dialogue and cursed treasure, but Blackbeard was not a misunderstood antihero. He was strategic, merciless, and fully aware of the power of psychological warfare. He didn't need to kill often, he let his reputation do the heavy lifting. But when he did act, he made sure it echoed. So it tracks, in some twisted way, that he'd linger. Some locals say he cursed the land and water with his last breath. That in death, his soul became a kind of guardian, or maybe a warden watching the coast for intruders. Others think he's still searching for his missing head, or his treasure, or the men who betrayed him. One theory suggests that Blackbeard was part of something older, that he didn't just become a ghost, he became part of the coast itself. A sort of sentient memory loop, woven into the dunes and the tides, returning whenever someone gets too close to the truth. Not a man anymore, but a force, a warning. And if you think that sounds dramatic, consider this. A lighthouse keeper, in the 19th century, reportedly abandoned his post after hearing unearthly screams from the rocks below. He said the voice called his name in a language he didn't recognize. He left his station, never returned, and refused to speak about what happened again. The area around Ocracoke remains strangely charged. Weather changes fast. Boats malfunction in clear conditions, electronics fail, and those who stay too long often talk about dreams, vivid, violent ones. Dreams of ships burning on the horizon and a man's silhouette against the flames. Still, people go searching. Tourists, treasure hunters, paranormal investigators, all looking for something tangible, some proof that Blackbeard left more than stories behind. What they usually find is discomfort. Because while most ghosts haunt a single place, a house, a battlefield, a single tragic tree, Blackbeard seems to haunt an idea. He's not tethered to land, he's mobile, restless, like a curse that sails with the tide, showing up only when you've almost forgotten he was real. And you'll know when he's near. The wind will change, the compass will spin, and somewhere just beyond the dunes you'll hear a voice that shouldn't exist anymore, laughing like the sea owes him something. But if ghost pirates are too dramatic for your taste, don't worry. The town of Bath has its own brand of weirdness, phantom hoofprints, whispered curses, and a colonial-era mystery that still presses its thumb into the town's throat every so often. The Bath Curse and Bath Hoofprints. There's something about Bath, North Carolina, a town so old its streets were laid before the United States had a name that feels brittle, like it's been sealed inside amber. It was the first official town in the colony, chartered in 1705, and for a time, it was the capital of a small, swampy world. Pirates, preachers, aristocrats, and exiled misfits shared the shoreline here, and they all left their marks, some carved into wood, others into memory. But the marks that no one's been able to explain? Those were burned into the earth. Locals call them the Bath Hoofprints, and they appear without warning, without explanation on certain nights, not in snow or mud, but in hard-packed earth or dry grass, sometimes on gravel. Occasionally on the surface of freshly poured concrete, always the same shape, a cloven hoof too large for any known animal in the region, deep, precise, wrong. The first recorded account dates back to the early 1700s, when colonists stumbled upon a trail of these hoofprints outside the town's church, leading into the woods and disappearing mid-path, as if the creature had launched into the air, or vanished entirely. The minister at the time declared it an evil sign. Some blamed Blackbeard, who was known to frequent Bath during his more diplomatic pirating days. Others whispered about older, darker things, curses left behind by witches, or something darker still. That's when the town started talking about the Bath Curse. Like most colonial legends, it's a little messy, and it has more than one version. One says a woman accused of witchcraft, whether fairly or not, was banished from the town, and in her final moments, she turned to the crowd and cursed them all. "Your land will forget you," she reportedly said, "and your peace will rot under your feet," which is admittedly a little theatrical, but if you're cursing a town, why not go full drama? Another version ties the curse to Blackbeard himself. After one of his final stays in Bath, some claimed he made a deal with who or what. Nobody agrees. But the story goes that he left behind a promise. Anyone who tried to erase his memory from the town would find themselves stalked by shadows, hounded by storms, and followed by hoofprints that never led anywhere human. For centuries, the stories came in waves. In 1883, a farmer found the prints circling his barn on the roof. No signs of climbing. Just perfect, 4-inch indentations burned into the shingles. In 1910, a road crew paving part of Main Street reportedly uncovered a series of hoofprints beneath the packed clay, perfectly preserved, as if pressed there just moments before. One worker refused to return the next day. He wouldn't say why. Modern sightings are rarer, but they still happen. In 1984, a local newspaper quietly reported on a path of unidentified animal tracks that appeared overnight across the town green. The soil was dry, no rain, no footprints except those. They started near the old graveyard and ended at the Pamlico River, where they simply stopped, as if whatever made them had stepped directly into the water and vanished. Skeptics have theories, of course. Goats, wild boars, deer prints distorted by time and weather, but none of those explain the placement. Hoof prints that appear in perfect patterns on rooftops, in attics, on windowsills, on the underside of bridges. One town historian noted that the Bath prints move with purpose. They don't wander, they arrive, they encircle, they vanish. Some believe they're not from an animal at all, but from something else. A being that returns to Bath when it's forgotten, or ignored, or remembered too loudly. A creature that doesn't walk through the town, but steps between places, leaving behind just enough evidence to rattle the bones of those paying attention. And then there's the psychological angle. Maybe the curse is the town itself. Bath is small, old, unchanged, a place where time folds in on itself and refuses to modernize. Maybe the weight of that history produces hallucinations, hoofprints that are just metaphors, shadows of unresolved guilt, ghosts of cultural sins. But that theory doesn't explain the physical evidence, the photos, the depth of the prints, the fact that no matter how many times they're dismissed, they keep returning. Always in the same shape, always in the same town, always without a sound. And perhaps that's the real curse, that there is no resolution. Just the constant tension of a town that knows it's haunted, but can't decide whether the ghost is a devil, a pirate, or the truth itself. But not every entity in North Carolina slinks in silence or stalks the night with hooves. Some, like the boo hag, come straight through your front door, climb onto your chest, and steal what you don't even know you're losing. The boo hag. In the low country of southeastern North Carolina, along the old coastal routes where the Spanish moss hangs low and the marshes never seem to fully dry, there's a story you don't hear in Sunday school. It doesn't come up in the brochures or the quaint historical walking tours. It lives behind closed doors, whispered in Gullah Geechee communities, with the kind of reverence reserved for things too real to question. They call her the boo hag. And if you've ever woken in the middle of the night, chest heavy, unable to move or speak or breathe, someone might have told you, gently, afterward, the boo hag rode you last night. She doesn't walk, she doesn't knock, she doesn't ask. She slips in, through cracks in the wall, under the door, down the chimney, through the tiniest breach in whatever you thought could protect you. The boo hag is not a spirit in the traditional Western sense. She's older, folkloric, tied to African diasporic traditions and oral storytelling passed down through generations. She's not a witch exactly, not a ghost, and not a demon, but she behaves a little like all three. The core belief is this: the boo hag is a skinless, parasitic entity that survives by stealing the breath and energy of living people. She enters your home at night, climbs onto your chest, and rides you while you sleep, not with violence, but with intention. She draws from your life force, not to kill you, but to feed. And when she's done, she slips back into the skin she stole, puts it on like a jacket, and walks among us in daylight, like nothing happened. Yes, she wears skin. That's part of the myth. She steals human skin and uses it to pass as one of us. Some say you can spot a boo hag during the day by her slightly off appearance, skin too tight or too loose, movements a fraction behind her eyes, breath just a little too measured. But most people don't notice. Or they don't want to. The boo hag doesn't just pick victims at random. She chooses people who are mentally or emotionally vulnerable, people who are restless, distracted, spiritually open. If you're unlucky enough to attract her attention, you might feel exhausted for days. You might have strange dreams. You might wake up and swear someone was sitting on your chest, pressing the air out of your lungs, whispering something into your ear that dissolved before you could remember it. Skeptics, of course, point to sleep paralysis. And yes, the symptoms match. Inability to move, a crushing sensation on the chest, hallucinations. But the thing is, sleep paralysis doesn't explain the scratches, or the footprints, or the smell of something rotten that lingers just a little too long. In some Gullah traditions, protective rituals involve spreading rice or salt around the bed. The buhag, like many supernatural entities in African diasporic lore, is obsessive. She'll have to stop and count every grain before she can reach you, and if the sun rises while she's still counting, she has to vanish. Some say red doors keep her out, others leave brooms by the threshold. Anything to slow her down. The buhag is not always evil, by the way. Some traditions describe her as morally ambiguous, a kind of necessary force, a balance, but she is never kind, never safe. And she's not stuck in the past. Reports quiet, half-believed still surface today, from people in Wilmington, Fayetteville, even as far west as Raleigh. They don't know each other. They don't know the legend. But they all describe the same thing. A waking nightmare, a presence, a pressure, a woman-shaped figure, whispering. And when they try to scream, they can't. But the buhag doesn't need screams. She needs silence, stillness, a little breath to borrow before the sun comes up. And in the fog-soaked wilderness just a few hours north, in a place no light reaches, where the trees seem to lean in and swallow stories whole, there are whispers of something even older. A swamp so vast and unknowable that people vanish into it not just physically, but from memory. They call it the Great Dismal Swamp. Great Dismal Swamp Mysteries. If you stand at the edge of the Great Dismal Swamp, it doesn't look evil. It looks bored, vast, flat. A stitched-together sprawl of peat bogs, cypress knees, and black water channels that stretch from northeastern North Carolina into southeastern Virginia. A borderless land where sunlight gets filtered into permanent dusk, and every sound seems like an echo of something not quite said. But don't let the stillness fool you. The swamp is watching. The Great Dismal Swamp has been swallowing secrets since before there were towns to name them. At over 100,000 acres today, down from its original million-plus, it's one of the largest remaining wild places on the East Coast. It's also one of the least understood, which is exactly how the legends like it. People don't visit the Dismal Swamp. They drift near it, drive past it, circle it carefully, and those who do go in rarely stay long. There are the usual stories: ghost lights, vanished hikers, cries in the night, boats that drift without oars, and shadows that watch from the tree line, but those are just the warm-up. The swamp's real mystery is its personality. It behaves. It responds. One of the oldest stories describes a couple who tried to build a homestead at the edge of the swamp in the 1802. They cleared trees, laid a foundation, set up camp. By morning, the entire site was flooded, though no rain had fallen. By the next day, the trees they'd cut had re-rooted themselves. The couple packed up and left. The forest, they said, put itself back. Local historians talk about the Maroon community's formerly enslaved people who escaped into the swamp and lived there for generations, building hidden villages deep within the unreachable zones. Some say their descendants are still there, living undetected. Others believe the spirits of those who never made it out now haunt the land, guiding or misleading any who try to follow their path. There are rumors of phantom canoes, drifting along the canals at dusk, with no paddler and no wake. People hear drums, low chanting, voices speaking in languages no one alive remembers. But the most chilling stories involve the land itself. Hikers have reported sudden disorientation compasses spinning, GPS apps failing, paths disappearing behind them as if rearranged. A search and rescue volunteer once described following a missing boy's footprints deep into the swamp, only for the tracks to stop at the center of a dry patch. No exit prints, no signs of struggle. Just a perfect circle of stillness. Theories abound: magnetic anomalies, methane pockets, optical illusions caused by the dense canopy. And sure, some of that might be true. But the land doesn't need tricks. It just needs time. And in the Great Dismal Swamp, time breaks. There are places where you walk for what feels like 10 minutes and come out an hour later. Others where you lose time entirely. Not a gap, exactly just a silence in your memory, a blank you can't refill. And then there's Lake Drummond, a round, perfectly formed freshwater lake at the center of the swamp. Scientists believe it was created by a meteor. Others say it was already there when the first humans arrived. A few whisper that it isn't a lake at all, but an eye. One that blinks every few hundred years. One that dreams. People have tried to drain the swamp, tame it, measure it. But the swamp doesn't care. It waits. For what? That's the part no one agrees on. But if you ever find yourself near its edge, and the birds go quiet, and the fog starts to rise from the ground instead of falling from the sky, don't go in. Because some parts of North Carolina don't need ghosts. They are one. Brown Lady of Chowan University. In the soft Gothic sprawl of Chowan University, tucked into the sleepy town of Murfreesboro, North Carolina, there is a ghost who does not scream, rattle chains, or leave cryptic messages on fogged-up windows. She just watches. They call her the Brown Lady, and if you're unlucky or maybe lucky enough, she'll watch you. The campus itself dates back to 1848, originally established as a women's college, and the buildings bear that age like antique furniture. Polished, creaky, filled with secrets no one dares sand down. Columns lean slightly. Trees look older than the bricks. And Whitaker Hall, the building most associated with the legend, carries a silence that has nothing to do with acoustics. That's where she's most often seen, in windows after hours, on staircases that should be empty, in the corners of dorm rooms where the lights never quite reach. The Brown Lady is described as a tall woman, in a long, flowing brown dress, simple, not ornate. No blood, no spectral chains. Just a stillness, a posture, eyes that don't shine, don't glow, but register you, as though she remembers who you are before you've even figured it out yourself. Legend claims she was once a student. The details, as with all proper hauntings, are a mess of contradictions. Some say she died tragically in the 1802nd from a fall down the central staircase. Others whisper it was heartbreak that took her, a love forbidden, or lost, or simply unrealized, and a few believe she never existed at all in any official records, that she wasn't a student, just someone who came to campus once and never left. The earliest documented sightings go back at least to the 1922nd, when a janitor working a night shift in Whitaker Hall reportedly saw a woman on the upper balcony. He called out, "No answer." When he climbed the stairs to investigate, she was gone. The doors were locked from the inside. Later reports from students are eerily similar, even decades apart. You see her from the back. She's walking, always toward a window, never in a rush, as if she doesn't know or doesn't care that she's being watched. But if you try to follow her, she disappears, not in a puff of smoke, not theatrically, just gone. 1 second she's there, the next she isn't. The university has never formally acknowledged the ghost, of course. Institutions prefer their mysteries academic, not paranormal. But ask around long enough, and you'll find faculty who've heard footsteps where there should be none. Cleaning staff who refuse to work alone on the 3rd floor. Students who switch dorms mid-semester with no real explanation. One former RA reported that she kept finding room doors ajar always in the same hallway, despite personally locking them the night before. She set up a camera. Nothing conclusive. But the next morning, the door was open again, and her camera was turned toward the wall. Then there's the phenomenon known to students simply as the mirror glitch. Several have reported seeing a shadow pass behind them in the mirror while brushing their teeth, only to find no one there. Some say the figure looks like it's wearing a long dress. Others swear that if you look too long into certain mirrors in the old dorms, you'll see her standing behind you, still, patient, as if waiting for you to ask the right question. But of course, no one ever does. Maybe that's the point. The brown lady doesn't want to be resolved. She wants to be remembered, felt, a presence more than a plot line. And she's not alone. Because in the fields and woods beyond Murfreesboro, far from dorm rooms and chapel bells, there's another figure from North Carolina folklore. One less subtle, one far louder. And it's not a woman in a dress, but something far, far more insectile. Gallinipper. There's a particular type of story that comes out of hot, humid southern nights. The kind you tell with a smirk over a folding chair and a citronella candle, half hoping the darkness just past the porch light doesn't start moving on its own. The gallinipper belongs to that tradition. To call it a mosquito is technically accurate, but cosmically insulting. The gallinipper, according to North Carolina folklore, is a mosquito the size of a bird, or a small dog, or, depending on the version you hear, a horse. Yes, a mosquito large enough to carry away small livestock and punch through screen doors like tissue paper. The stories differ, but the punchline is always the same. It's too big to be possible, and just believable enough to keep you from sleeping soundly in the woods. The tale dates back at least to the 19th century, with roots in African American folklore across the Carolinas and beyond. Some versions of the gallinipper trace it to Gullah Geechee traditions, where it's served partly as humor, partly as metaphor, and partly as a warning to respect the wilderness, or else. It's described as having wings that beat like thunder, a proboscis sharp as a nail, and a hunger that can't be satisfied. Some versions say it makes a sound like a train when it flies overhead. Others insist you never hear it coming, just the aftermath. And while it's mostly treated as a tall tale, a few odd stories suggest otherwise. In the 1932nd, a farmer near the Sandhills region claimed something tore through his chicken coop during the night. No signs of a predator, no blood, just a gaping hole in the wire fencing and several birds missing. He described hearing a whining buzz just after midnight, but assumed it was an old generator shorting out. He never found out what it was. In the 1952nd, an army training exercise in the Uwharrie area was reportedly disrupted by what one soldier called an airborne thing that looked like a giant wasp. The report was never made public. But the soldier told his grandson decades later. The grandson put it on a blog in 2009. The internet did what it always does with weird folklore, laughed nervously, then moved on. And yet, the gallinipper persists. Some folklorists believe it's a symbolic creature representing the overreach of industrialization or colonial disease, or nature's retaliation against invaders. Others think it's just a joke made literal, an exaggerated version of a real mosquito problem in the South, turned myth over firelight and too much moonshine. But a few take it more seriously. They say the gallinipper doesn't live here year-round, that it migrates or hibernates or waits, that it only appears when the air is thick enough, the sky is still enough, and the people are tired enough not to look too hard. They say it's not one insect, but the first insect, a relic from when the world was hotter, stranger, more permissive of monsters. And if you've ever been bitten by something in the woods, something that left a welt the size of a golf ball, and you never actually saw it, well, maybe you did. Maybe it just flew away before you could react. But don't worry, there's a friendlier face in the next tale. Sort of. She's not monstrous, exactly. Just misunderstood. Half porpoise, half woman, entirely legend. Her name is Porpoise Sal, and she's been waiting by the shore for quite a while. Porpoise Sal, just off the coast of North Carolina, in the brackish water where the Sound meets the sea, there's a story that drifts like a low-tide fog so old and so often repeated, that no one really remembers where it started, only that it refuses to leave. Her name is Porpoise Sal, and depending on who's telling it, she's either a spirit, a protector, or something that used to be human but gave it up a long time ago. Not in a tragic way. In a deliberate way. The legend is most commonly associated with the waters around Beaufort and the Outer Banks, where the currents tangle and the land seems to vanish and reappear depending on the moon. Sailors spoke of her first, some reverently, some fearfully. She wasn't a ghost ship or a sea monster. She was a woman who swam with the porpoises, or was a porpoise, depending on how deep into the bottle the storyteller was. In every version, Sal appears at twilight half submerged, her face barely breaking the surface, watching. Her features are striking, but not delicate. Strong cheekbones, dark eyes, hair that moves even when the water is still. Some say she sings, but not in any language we know. A low clicking melody, not unlike the calls of the porpoises that swim near her. And if you hear it, you'll either never lose your way at sea again, or you'll be lost for good. Her origin shifts with the tide. Some stories say she was the daughter of a fisherman, born with gills behind her ears and webbing between her toes. Others claim she was a young woman who drowned, but was saved, transformed by the porpoises themselves, who raised her from death and made her one of their own, a protector of the shoals, a sentinel of the storm. There's even an older version, whispered by the descendants of the earliest settlers, that Porpoise Sal predates colonization, that she was a shapeshifter tied to indigenous lore, a water spirit who took human form not to become one of us, but to study us, understand us, warn us, maybe. Her appearances tend to cluster around shipwrecks or just before them. Lifeboat survivors have claimed to see a dark figure swimming alongside them, pushing debris closer, guiding them toward shore. One man in 1906 swore that she pulled him by the collar for over an hour, towing him from a capsized schooner to a sandbar that hadn't been on any map. He lived. Everyone else aboard did not. He refused to speak of it again. Other stories paint a stranger picture. Boats rocked in calm water, nets pulled up empty, but with thin strands of long black hair tangled among the lines. A Coast Guard diver in the 1972nd reported feeling surrounded by something in the water, hundreds of porpoises moving as one, but at the center, something else, a presence. He surfaced early, trembling. The official report said, disorientation due to low oxygen. He never dove again. Skeptics, of course, dismiss it all. Porpoise Sal is just a legend, a sea myth, a personification of the ocean's unpredictability, dressed up in feminine mystery to make the danger feel more poetic. And maybe they're right. But that doesn't explain the sightings, the recurring details, the pattern. Every decade or so she's seen again. Not often, just enough. Always, where the line between land and sea gets blurry, always near danger, and always at dusk, when the light doesn't help you and the sound of the waves could be laughing or warning. If she's real, she doesn't need to be explained. She already knows the rules of this place. Maybe she made them. Because sometimes, North Carolina's mysteries aren't about death, or violence, or darkness. Sometimes, they're about transformation, surrender, becoming part of something older and colder and wider than you. And some spirits don't haunt because they're trapped. They haunt because they chose to stay. But not every coastal phantom swims. Some sit quietly on the edge of the land, watching the years roll by from inside a barrel of colonial rum. Which brings us to the next mystery. A girl who shouldn't be where she was, and a keg that never should have been opened. Rum Keg Girl. In the dense and humid backwoods of colonial North Carolina, just inland from where the sea turns to marsh and the marsh turns to pine, there's a story so strange, so completely unbothered by logic, that it feels like it has to be true. They call her the Rum Keg Girl, and no one knows her real name. The version most commonly told starts in the mid-1700s during a hot, heavy summer in a small port town, possibly Edenton, possibly Bath, possibly somewhere lost to fire and erosion. A merchant ship from the Caribbean arrived, loaded with sugar, molasses, and several barrels of extremely valuable rum. One of the barrels was heavier than the others, too heavy. When they pried it open, expecting to find stones or smuggled goods, what they found was a young woman, preserved, not mummified, not skeletal, just there, skin pale but intact, hair still floating gently in the thick rum, eyes closed as if she'd simply drifted off in the middle of a story. The sailors recoiled, the townspeople gathered, theories abounded. Some said she was a stowaway, hiding in the barrel and suffocating by accident. Others believed she was placed there on purpose, killed and hidden in transit, but none of the facts added up. There was no decomposition, no smell, and perhaps most unsettling of all, her body was warm. The local doctor refused to sign any declaration of death. A preacher said the devil was in the keg. A sailor swore that when he looked at her, her lips moved. They buried the barrel, not the girl, the entire keg, out of fear or reverence or maybe both. And that should have been the end. Except she didn't stay buried. Over the decades, people began to report sightings of a girl standing near old shipping lanes, barefoot, in a colonial dress soaked to the knees. She didn't speak, didn't blink, just watched. Some claim she'd appear during heat waves. Others say she walked the piers at night when the humidity got thick enough to taste. In Edenton, a historic tavern reports cold spots near a restored rum barrel display. In Bath, a storm cellar that was once used for smuggling was found to contain waterlogged footprints despite the fact that it hadn't flooded in over 100 years. One family claimed the girl came to them in a dream, standing at the foot of the bed, dripping wet, whispering a name that no one in the family recognized. When they researched the name later, they found it belonged to a Dutch merchant vessel that vanished in 1743. But the strangest part of the legend isn't the ghost herself. It's the idea that she's not dead, that something about her immersion in the rum changed her, preserved her, anchored her. Some folklorists link her to Caribbean death rites. Others suggest she's a kind of maritime banshee, one who warns not of death, but of betrayal. A few theories go full mythological, that she's a siren punished for disobedience, trapped in alcohol for eternity, a spirit soaked in spirits. And then there are those who believe she was never human at all, that the barrel was a trap, not to imprison her, but to contain her. And when it was opened, the boundary between two worlds briefly dissolved. Now she's stuck, not gone, not alive, not allowed to move on. And every so often, when the rum flows too freely and the air gets too thick and the land starts to sweat, someone sees her again. Still watching, still waiting, still not speaking. And if you think that's unsettling, wait until you hear what happened to a colony that vanished without a trace. Not a person, not a ship. An entire settlement erased from the earth except for one single word, carved into wood. Croatoan, Lost Colony of Roanoke. The mystery of the Lost Colony of Roanoke is perhaps the most famous vanishing act in American history, and yet, somehow, it still feels like no one's telling the whole story. It's not just that 115 English colonists disappeared from an island off the coast of North Carolina. It's that they vanished so completely, so cleanly, that it feels more like a reset than a disaster. Like someone, or something, didn't just remove them, but erase them. It began with hope. In 1587, over 2 decades before Jamestown, and nearly 150 years before the American Revolution, a group of English settlers arrived on Roanoke Island with the intention of building a new life. Among them were artisans, farmers, and families. This wasn't a temporary expedition or a band of soldiers. This was a community. They had plans. They had children. One of them, Virginia Dare, became the first English child born in the New World. But within 3 years, they were gone. No signs of war, no bodies, no wreckage, just emptiness and a single word carved into a post. Croton. Their governor, John White, had sailed back to England in 1587 for supplies. Delays, including a war with Spain, kept him stranded for 3 years. When he finally returned in 1590, the colony was abandoned. The palisade walls were dismantled, not destroyed. There were no signs of violence. The homes had been taken down with care, as if the inhabitants had simply packed up and left. A tree nearby bore another carving, just CRO, cut off, unfinished. Croatoan was the name of a nearby island now. Hatteras Island, and the name of a Native American tribe in the area. Some believe the colonists moved there and integrated with the tribe. Maybe they gave up their English identity, embraced survival, and never looked back. Except, if that's what happened, where are the descendants? No confirmed graves, no confirmed documents, no confirmed evidence of a mixed community. Linguists and anthropologists have combed through generations of oral traditions and regional dialects for signs of English influence, nothing conclusive. And attempts to locate the colony's remains through digs, satellite imaging, and ground-penetrating radar have yielded conflicting results. Fragments, hints, pieces that don't quite fit together. Some believe the settlers were attacked not by Native Americans, but by disease, starvation, or internal conflict. But again, where are the bones? Where's the record? Colonial life was notoriously well documented by necessity. The absence of even a trace suggests something more deliberate, not just a loss, a disappearance. And then there are the stories, the ones you don't find in history books. Some say strange lights were seen in the skies over Roanoke in the weeks before the colony went silent. Others tell of dark shapes moving through the woods at night, too fast and too quiet to be human. One theory posits that the colonists stumbled onto something ancient, something they weren't meant to find, something that didn't kill them, but took them. Of course, the more grounded explanations still have traction. Maybe the colonists splintered off into smaller groups. Maybe they were absorbed into several tribes. Maybe they fled inland and died in anonymity. But every version runs into the same problem. No proof, no trail, no resolution. And perhaps the most unsettling question isn't what happened, but why has it stayed unsolved for over 400 years? Historians have had centuries to crack it. And yet, we're no closer than John White was when he stood staring at that word Croatoan, wondering what he had missed. Maybe that's the point. Some mysteries are made to be remembered, not solved. And this one, this ghost of a colony, feels like it was designed to haunt. Like the disappearance itself is the monument, a story without a body. Just a whisper in the trees. But if the idea of 115 people disappearing from an island sounds surreal, imagine something smaller, something more recent, vanishing without any trace at all. Like a child, walking out of her house in the middle of the night, and never coming back. Disappearance of Asha Degree, 2000. In the early hours of the 14th of February, 2000, in the small town of Shelby, North Carolina, a 9-year-old girl named Asha Degree walked out of her home in the middle of a storm and vanished into the dark. She wasn't running from anything, at least, not that anyone could tell. Her family was close-knit, her home was safe, and there were no signs of abuse, neglect, or trauma. Asha was a bright student. She loved basketball. She went to church. She wasn't the type to sneak out of bed, let alone into the night. But sometime after 2 a.m., she packed a small bag with her favorite clothes and left. Alone. Into the cold and rain. Multiple drivers reported seeing a small girl walking along Highway 18 wearing a long-sleeved white t-shirt, white pants, and carrying a backpack. She didn't look distressed. When one driver tried to stop, she ran into the woods. That was the last confirmed sighting of Asha Degree. By morning, her parents discovered her bed was empty. A search was launched immediately. Police, dogs, helicopters, volunteers, They combed the woods, ditches, and roadside areas for days. They found candy wrappers, a pencil, and a marker that may have belonged to her. Later, they found her hair bow, discovered in a nearby tool shed. But no girl, no explanation, no leads. The case only grew stranger when, over a year later, Asha's backpack was found buried in a plastic bag 30 miles away off a rural highway in Burke County. It had her name written on it. Inside were school papers and a few personal belongings, but the location raised more questions than answers. Who moved her bag that far? Why bury it? Why there? Theories sprang up immediately. Did she run away? Was she lured out? Groomed by someone? Did she have a secret life her parents didn't know about? The FBI found no evidence of such. Her family insisted rightfully that Asha was well cared for, well loved, and not the kind of child who'd walk away without reason. And yet, she did. Or seemed to. The case remains active to this day. The FBI has offered rewards. Age-progressed photos have been released. Tips still come in, though none have led to her. Some suggest she was abducted by someone who knew how to hide in plain sight. Others believe she left to meet someone she trusted, someone who told her to bring a bag, to dress a certain way, to walk alone. But there's a deeper unease that threads through the case. It's not just that Asha vanished. It's how the world around her remained untouched. No signs of a struggle, no forced entry, no camera footage. Just a small girl walking into the rain, as if guided by something invisible, something she believed in. And that's the part that haunts. Because Asha's story doesn't feel like a crime. It feels like a rift, like something opened in the fabric of the ordinary and swallowed her. 1 minute, she was there. And the next, nothing. Just empty roads, silent trees, and a backpack buried 30 miles from home. Some mysteries demand explanations. Others demand that we listen. To the silence. To what isn't there. To what might still be. Valentine's Day Murders, 1971. Patricia Mann and Jesse McBain. It was supposed to be just a date. Patricia Mann, a nursing student at Watts Hospital in Durham, had plans with her boyfriend, Jesse McBain, on the night of the 12th of February, 1971. They were young. Patricia was 20, Jesse just 19, but serious, sweethearts, steady. The kind of couple that made parents relax a little and friends roll their eyes, fondly. They went to a Valentine's Day dance hosted by the hospital. A standard night. Music, laughter, polite flirting under disco lights. They left around 11:30 p.m., got into Jesse's car, and drove off into the dark. Neither of them was seen alive again. 2 weeks later, their bodies were found in a wooded area just outside Durham. They were carefully laid side by side, partially covered with leaves and brush. The manner of death was precise, controlled, and unsettlingly calm. Their shoes were removed. Their wrists and ankles were bound with rope. There was no robbery, no chaos, no sign of random violence. It was methodical. And whoever did it, whoever took the time to arrange the bodies with such chilling order, never came forward, never left a trace, never confessed. From the beginning, police had almost nothing to work with. No witnesses, no fingerprints, no surveillance footage. This was 1971, after all. Just a missing persons report, a young couple gone without reason, and 2 lives that ended in a way that felt ritualistic, personal, and yet impersonal enough to suggest a kind of practiced detachment. Theories came fast. A jealous ex? A crime of passion? A stalker? The possibility of an outsider was raised and quickly dismissed. No strangers had been seen in the area. No similar murders were happening nearby. This was local, intentional, planned. But then, silence. The case went cold for decades. And yet, the details never quite faded from Durham's memory. Locals remembered, whispered, shared theories in late-night kitchens. Law enforcement never officially gave up, but the leads grew thin. The rope, the bindings, the neatness of the scene, it all pointed to someone with a precise kind of mind, someone who understood control, someone who may have done it before or would do it again. In the early 2010s, the case was reopened by a new generation of investigators, armed with modern technology and a fresh sense of urgency. DNA testing was applied to the old evidence. New witness statements were collected. Rumors were re-examined. One suspect rose to the surface. A man who had worked at a nearby university at the time of the murders, known to Patricia and Jesse, known to many, intelligent, respected, and according to those who later came forward, odd, possessive, private. There were stories, but no proof. Accusations, but no arrest. And so the case still hangs in the air, unresolved but not forgotten. Patricia and Jesse's graves are still visited. Their families, now graying and quiet, still wait, still wonder. It's not just the brutality of the murders that haunts people. It's the intent, the precision, the sense that someone took their time, that it wasn't just a crime, it was a message, a performance, a disappearance carried out in plain sight and concealed with chilling grace. Even now, over 50 years later, the site where the bodies were found carries weight. The trees haven't forgotten. People still drive past slowly, still pause, still look over their shoulders, because the couple may have died on Valentine's Day. But the part that stays with you is how calculated it all was. And if that case still gives you chills, imagine being on a quiet campus, surrounded by friends and familiarity, and realizing someone is watching you from the trees. The next mystery takes us back to Chapel Hill. A student, a quiet path, and a murder that has gone unsolved for nearly 60 years. Murder of Sue Ellen Evans, 1965. The University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill is known for many things. Its academics, its basketball team, its sprawling campus layered with history. But on the night of May 6, 1965, it became the setting for a mystery that would cast a shadow over its manicured lawns and shaded trails. Her name was Sue Ellen Evans. She was 20 years old, a junior at UNC, bright, thoughtful, well-liked. She was known for being responsible, a good student, no enemies, no drama. That night, she was seen walking through Battle Park, a wooded area adjacent to the main campus, a place where students often took shortcuts, especially during warm spring evenings. It was well known, comfortable, but Sue Ellen didn't make it home. Her body was found the next morning in a wooded section of the park. She had been killed quietly, without any witnesses, just yards from paths that students used daily. There were no screams reported, no struggle heard, just the sudden, brutal absence of a young woman who had been walking home. Chapel Hill was shaken. The idea that someone could be targeted so close to the heart of the university, in a public space, without anyone seeing was unthinkable. And the fact that it happened to Sue Ellen, who by all accounts lived a careful and grounded life, only added to the shock. The investigation kicked off immediately. Theories abounded. A transient? An escaped patient from a nearby facility? A classmate? A professor? Police interviewed dozens of people, students, faculty, anyone who might have seen something or known Sue Ellen's routine. A few tips came in. Someone claimed they heard rustling near the time of the murder. Another said they saw a man walking quickly from the woods. But nothing stuck. No arrest was made. The case slowly slipped into the cold file drawer, yet it never truly left public consciousness. Every few years, a student paper would run an article on it, an anniversary piece, a podcast episode. And each time, new interest would flare, followed by the same bitter silence. Over time, the case became more than a crime. It became a presence. Battle Park changed. Students still walked through it, but with earbuds lowered and glances cast over shoulders. There were calls for better lighting, patrols were increased, but the ghost of the unsolved murder remained. Some believed Sue Ellen's killer was someone on campus, someone familiar, a person who had watched her, followed her, picked the moment carefully. The murder wasn't random, it felt chosen, calculated, done with the kind of stillness that suggests planning, not impulse. Others believe the killer was never caught because he left town, a drifter, a one-time predator who moved through Chapel Hill like smoke, vanished before the story could solidify around him. But there's something about Battle Park that still makes people uneasy. The way the trees curve in on themselves, the way footsteps sound too loud when you're alone, the way the air changes when the sun drops behind the chapel spire. Sue Ellen Evans never got justice, but she was never forgotten. Not by the community, not by her family, and not by the land itself, which still feels like it's holding on to something it doesn't quite want to release. And the worst part? She wasn't the last to vanish without a trace in the heart of North Carolina, because 40 years later, in another town, another young person disappeared, this time from the middle of downtown Charlotte. One minute he was laughing with friends, the next, gone. Kyle Fleischman, 2007. On the night of the 8th of November, 2007, Kyle Fleischman walked out of a Charlotte nightclub and vanished into the city like he had never existed. He was 24 years old, charismatic, kind, and well known among friends and family for being the sort of guy who always called his mom back and never left a friend behind at a party. That night, he'd gone to see a Dane Cook comedy show at the Bobcats Arena, now Spectrum Center, with a few close friends. The group went out for drinks afterward, first to Fuel Pizza on 5th Street, then to Buckhead Saloon. Around 2 a.m., Kyle left the bar alone. What happened next remains one of Charlotte's most disorienting urban mysteries. His friends later explained that Kyle had left his jacket and debit card at the bar. His phone, however, was on him. He called his parents, several friends, and his sister. All calls went unanswered. Then, the phone went silent. Security footage from that night shows Kyle walking alone through uptown Charlotte. He doesn't appear drunk, disoriented, or afraid. He's walking with purpose, calm, maybe a little hurried, but nothing alarming. And then, he disappears. No struggle, no witnesses, no video showing where he went after 2:30 a.m. Just silence. In a city still buzzing from a Thursday night out, Kyle vanished between two cameras. Between two streetlights. His family launched an immediate and intense search. Posters went up, billboards, a Facebook group. News outlets picked up the story, first local, then national. Everyone was looking, but no trace was found. Not his phone, not his clothes, not a single clue. Theories surfaced, but they all hit the same wall. Theory number 1. Accident. Maybe Kyle fell into a construction site or drainage system, but the area he was last seen in was well lit, populated, and regularly patrolled. If he had fallen, someone would have noticed eventually. Theory number 2. Foul play. Could he have been abducted? Robbed? Attacked? But nothing was caught on camera, and there were no signs of a scuffle. Nothing from the surveillance footage or surrounding businesses showed anything out of the ordinary. Theory number 3. Intentional disappearance. But Kyle had no history of mental illness or stress-related episodes. He was planning a trip. He had work lined up. He'd just seen a comedy show with friends. No note, no warning signs, no reason. One detail that still bothers investigators and armchair detectives alike, a series of cell phone pings from his phone that night suggest he may have walked several miles south toward an industrial area of Charlotte. That direction makes no logical sense. It wasn't the way home, it wasn't near any friend's place, and at that hour, it was mostly warehouses and office buildings, closed and empty. Some have suggested he was being followed. Others believe he was trying to meet someone. but no communications or text messages support either theory. And then there's the final, quiet rumor spoken in low tones by some locals who've worked in downtown Charlotte for decades, that Kyle Fleischman is not the only one to vanish like this. There are other cases, other names, other late-night disappearances that don't add up. Not many, but enough to make you wonder. Did Kyle stumble into a part of the city that doesn't quite follow the rules? Was he taken by someone or something just smart enough to know where the blind spots are? Or did he walk into the city's undercurrent, that invisible world that pulses beneath the crosswalks and skyscrapers, the place where people go when they fall between two frames of security footage and never come back? There's no answer, just a long, haunting gap in the timeline of a man who should have been found, who should have walked home, who should have lived to tell his version of the story. But in North Carolina, some stories write themselves in silence, and the silence, when it's that complete, is a story of its own. Ira Yarmolenko, 2008. 1 year later, on the edge of the Catawba River in Mount Holly, North Carolina, another young person vanished briefly and was found under circumstances so strange that even the arrest and trial couldn't quiet the echo of unanswered questions. Irina Yarmolenko, known to her friends as Ira, was 20 years old. A UNC Charlotte student with a creative streak and a quiet confidence, she had plans to study abroad and a growing passion for photography. On May 5, 2008, she was seen running errands during the day normal stuff. She stopped at her bank, visited a Starbucks, then drove to the banks of the Catawba River. That was the last time anyone saw her alive. Later that afternoon, her car was found on a dirt road by the river engine off, doors locked, windows up. Inside the car, Ira's body was discovered in the driver's seat. The scene was wrong. Initial reports described her body as seated awkwardly, her head against the window, with no signs of obvious trauma. The car had not crashed. The ground around it was undisturbed, no skid marks, no damage, just a parked car and a dead girl. Her death was quickly ruled a homicide strangulation, but the why and the how grew murky immediately. Suspicion first turned toward Ira's own connections, a boyfriend, then an ex. Friends were questioned. Nothing led anywhere. Then, in a strange twist, police arrested 2 men who had reportedly been working at a nearby industrial site. They claimed they hadn't seen anything, but forensic evidence tied their presence to the area. One of the men had a prior criminal history. It seemed like the case was heading toward resolution, but then everything unraveled. The defense argued that the DNA evidence was contaminated, that the timeline didn't make sense, that there was no physical evidence placing the men in Ira's car or with Ira herself. A retrial was ordered. Appeals were filed. The conviction was vacated. And the question returned, if not them, then who? The riverside where Ira's car was found is not a remote area, but it's not exactly busy either. People go there to be alone, to think, or to do things they don't want anyone seeing. Some suggested she went there to take photos. Her camera was found at the scene. Others theorized she was meeting someone, but no digital record pointed to a planned rendezvous. And Ira wasn't the kind of person who wandered into bad situations. Then there are the fringe theories, the ones that suggest Ira may have stumbled onto something she wasn't supposed to see, something hidden, buried, literally or otherwise, an illicit deal, a secret camp, a person who wasn't supposed to be there. Maybe she photographed something. Maybe someone noticed. Some investigators believe her car was moved post-mortem, that the scene was staged to look like she died peacefully, a kind of gentle erasure, the truth tidied up. But no one knows. Ira's case is still open, still raw, still coated in that strange fog of too much, yet not enough. People remember her smile, her curiosity, her intelligence. But the place where her story should have continued is just a blank page. And North Carolina keeps turning those pages, keeps stacking the files. Each case a gap, each mystery a pause. And out in the rural corners of the state, sometimes even married couples vanish into the silence. No enemies, no warning signs, just a house, and then no one left inside. John and Annie Starnes, murders, 1952nd. In the quiet hills of western North Carolina during the 1952nd, nestled among aging trees and weather-worn farms, John and Annie Starnes lived what most would describe as an unremarkable life. They were retired, private, and largely forgotten by the outside world, a couple living out their final years in a modest home in rural Buncombe County. Until someone ended their story quietly, brutally, and without explanation. Their deaths were discovered by a neighbor who, after not seeing the couple for several days, went to check in. What they found sent ripples of unease through the entire county. John and Annie were both dead, no signs of robbery, no forced entry. Their home was undisturbed, as if frozen in time, the kind of scene where everything looks normal until you realize it's not. There was no sign of a struggle. No one heard anything. The coroner noted their estimated time of death as sometime in the night, perhaps a day or two earlier. What few details have survived suggest that John was found in his chair, as if he'd simply stopped mid-thought. Annie was in the bedroom. Both were dead, yet the cause was never officially disclosed, or at least never confirmed to the public. The investigation stalled almost immediately. There were rumors, of course, that a drifter had passed through town, that a relative stood to gain from their deaths, that a neighbor had been feuding with John over a disputed boundary line. But none of these theories were backed by evidence. The sheriff's department at the time had limited resources, and in the absence of obvious clues, the case was gently set aside. And yet, those who lived nearby couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The Starnes had no enemies, no debts, and no reason to fear anyone. They weren't involved in local drama. They didn't keep secrets, at least, not the kind anyone ever discovered. So why were they targeted? Or, and this is the darker theory, were they even the intended victims? One idea that quietly circulated among older residents was that John and Annie had witnessed something they shouldn't have. Something that brought them into the path of a very specific kind of violence, one that removes witnesses rather than seeks revenge. But what could a pair of retirees in a rural area possibly have seen? Some say it involved illegal moonshine operations in the mountains. Others say it was more personal, a family dispute gone horribly wrong. A few insist there was something strange happening on their property in the weeks leading up to the murders. Unmarked cars, unfamiliar faces, flashlights in the woods after dark. Of course, those are just whispers. There's no documentation, no official statements, just silence. And in small towns, silence can be louder than a scream. Eventually, the house was sold. New people moved in. Life went on. But some say the air in that part of the county still feels strange, heavy, like the land knows something it won't share. And the case of John and Annie Starnes remains unsolved to this day. But they weren't the last to vanish from the public eye in North Carolina. And they weren't the only ones whose deaths seemed to exist in the blurry space between targeted and inexplicable. Because just a few decades later, in a completely different part of the state, a series of disappearances would begin, this time focused on young black women. And no one seemed to notice the pattern. Or maybe they did and just looked away. The Lost Girls of Rocky Mount. Between 2005 and 2009, the town of Rocky Mount, North Carolina population, roughly 60,000, began quietly losing women. One by one, they disappeared. And one by one, their bodies started turning up abandoned in wooded areas, shallow graves, or hidden in overgrown fields along country roads. At first, each case was treated as an isolated tragedy, but patterns began to emerge, patterns that couldn't be ignored. 8 women, all black, all in their 20s or 30s, all with similar socioeconomic backgrounds. Most had struggled with poverty. Several were known to police, often due to drug-related charges or sex work facts that, unfairly but predictably, slowed down the urgency with which their disappearances were investigated. Their names were Jackie Nikilia Thorpe, Ernestine Battle, Jarnice Latanya Hargrove, Taraha Shanice Nicholson, Roberta Williams, Christine Boone, Yolanda Lancaster, and Melinda Battle. All gone within 4 years, all found in conditions that suggested deliberate disposal. And yet, for too long, the cases were treated separately. It wasn't until the body count grew and the similarities mounted that the media started calling them what they were, the Lost Girls of Rocky Mount. A suspect eventually emerged, Antoine Pittman, a man with a criminal record who had lived in proximity to several of the victims. He was convicted in 2011 for the murder of Taraha Nicholson. DNA evidence linked him to her case. Authorities suggested he might be responsible for more deaths, but he was never formally charged with the others. The official narrative seemed satisfied. A single killer, caught, case closed. But the families weren't satisfied, and neither were the residents of Rocky Mount. Because the deeper you look into the timeline, the messier it gets. Some victims were last seen alive after Pittman was already in custody for unrelated charges. Some bodies showed signs of post-mortem staging inconsistent with his known behaviors. Witness statements pointed to other vehicles, other men, other possibilities. Some began to wonder, was Pittman a convenient answer to an inconvenient problem? Was he guilty and a scapegoat? Did his conviction allow deeper questions to be buried? Why did it take so long for anyone to notice that multiple women were missing? Why was the pattern only acknowledged after it could no longer be denied? And why, after all these years, have no additional charges been filed? This is the kind of mystery that doesn't have one ending or one beginning. It's not a ghost story or a cryptid in the woods. It's a structural mystery, an indictment written in silence. A wound that never healed because the knife was never fully removed. Some say there may have been more victims, unfound, unnamed. Others believe the killer or killers are still free. That Rocky Mount's long stretches of highway and forest still hold secrets too uncomfortable to bring to light. And when the air is humid and the cicadas start to drone, some residents still avoid the back roads near the woods where too many shoes were found without their owners. Because some mysteries aren't about the supernatural. They're about who gets remembered and who gets quietly disappeared. Multiple unsolved homicides around North Carolina. North Carolina keeps its secrets tucked between ridgelines and interstates, old riverbanks and shopping centers. But sometimes, those secrets aren't old at all. Sometimes, they're listed on the North Carolina State Bureau of Investigation's cold case website, name after name, face after face. The photos are faded now, some pixelated, some grainy, but all wearing the same expression, a moment frozen just before a mystery begins. There is no single thread connecting these victims. They weren't part of one killer's spree. They didn't all vanish from one town. But collectively, they tell a story of unresolved violence across the state, a patchwork of loss stitched together by silence. Let's start with Emma Mae Terry. She was last seen alive in Halifax County in 1994. A kind woman, known for her cooking and her generosity. Her family reported her missing almost immediately. Weeks later, she was found dead in a rural area off the road. No arrest, no suspect, just absence and grief. Then there's Brittany Lynn Locklear, a first grader in Hoke County, abducted in 1998 while waiting for her school bus. Her case struck a raw nerve across the state. Hundreds of volunteers searched for her. Tips flooded in. The governor made a public plea, and still nothing. Her killer has never been found. Deborah Nunnery, murdered in 1991-inch Cumberland County, was discovered in a wooded area miles from home. The cause of death was clear. The motive was not. No one came forward. No one confessed. Her family still waits. Each of these cases, Terry, Locklear, Nunnery, is treated by the SBI as an active investigation. But active in cold case language doesn't mean what most people think. It means the files are technically open. It means the evidence still exists, boxed and labeled. It means a phone call tomorrow could change everything, or nothing. Some of the cases are chilling because of their randomness. Others feel targeted, like the murderer knew exactly what they were doing, and who they were doing it to. And the longer these names sit unsolved, the more they start to blur together into a larger question. Why are there so many? Part of the answer is geography. North Carolina's landscape makes for easy hiding. Thick woods, empty back roads, bodies found in places you only end up by accident or by intention. Part of it is systemic. Some victims were people society forgets too easily: poor, marginalized, struggling. And part of it may be something darker, a pattern we haven't recognized yet, or don't want to. The SBI lists dozens of cold case homicides. Some stretch back to the 1962nd. Others are from just a few years ago. Some are children. Some are elderly. All are waiting. The common denominator? They all have families who still look out the window sometimes, wondering if they missed something. Who still check the phone, just in case. Who still mark anniversaries that shouldn't exist. And maybe the scariest part isn't that the killers got away. It's that some of them probably never left. But for all the rural isolation of these statewide cases, some of the deepest mysteries are found in North Carolina's cities, urban centers, where the proximity of people doesn't guarantee justice. Just ask the families of Durham. Because in that city, known for its tech, its universities, and its southern charm, there's a long list of names still waiting for closure and no shortage of shadows left to chase. Durham Unsolved Homicides. Durham is a city of contrasts. You can stand on a cobblestone street sipping fair trade espresso while, just a block away, someone boards up the windows of a house where justice still hasn't arrived. The skyline rises with biotech money and university prestige, but in the corners of its grid are names the city hasn't said out loud in a long time. Names like Cesar Yanez Ortiz. He was just 19 when he was shot and killed in 2016, a young man with his life ahead of him, found on a Durham street with no known suspects, no clear motive, and no one arrested. Or Cynthia Kirk, murdered in 1989. She was 29, a mother. Her case received attention early on, but as the leads dried up, so did the media coverage. 30+ years later, her photo still sits in an open case file, yellowing at the edges. Then there's Harvey Richardson, killed in 1991. Few details remain public. His story, like so many others, is buried under the weight of time and bureaucracy. These aren't isolated incidents. They are part of a list maintained by the Durham Police Department: unsolved homicides that stretch back decades. Some are recent. Some are practically forgotten. All of them represent lives that ended too soon, and families that are still asking the same questions. Why? How? Who? And why hasn't anyone been held accountable? The department has a cold case unit. Officers revisit old files. Tips are still accepted, but resources are limited. Cases compete with newer crimes. Witnesses move. Evidence degrades. And slowly, the urgency fades, replaced by a kind of institutional melancholy, an understanding that most of these cases probably won't be solved, but no one wants to be the one to officially say that. Some community activists have called out disparities in how cases are handled, that the city seems to care more when certain kinds of victims are involved, those with more influence, more visibility, more affluence. Others point to a culture of silence. People don't talk to police. Fear outweighs justice. Old grudges stay buried. But the cases remain. One mother still pins articles about her son to her living room wall, turning it into a kind of shrine to unfinished business. One brother still walks the block where his sister was found, just to see if anyone looks different, like they might finally say something. The city moves on. New buildings rise. Tech companies relocate. Restaurants open. Schools expand. But underneath it all, Durham holds its ghosts like a ledger neatly kept, rarely reconciled. There's a question that looms over every cold case. Is the killer still here? Still walking these same streets? Still riding the bus? Still standing in line at the store? Still living among the very people who remember the names of the dead? It's not just that the mysteries remain unsolved, it's that they've been allowed to settle in. But Durham isn't alone. All across North Carolina, other cities, Charlotte, Wilmington, Greensboro, carry their own catalogs of quiet grief, case files unopened for years, numbers without narratives. And in one county down by the coast, the open cases go back decades. Different town, different faces, same silence. Charlotte, Mecklenburg, cold cases. Charlotte is a city that sells reinvention like a product line. Bank towers where cotton mills once stood, glossy condos where trolley tracks used to rattle. It's a city in motion, faster, richer, newer every year. But underneath the glinting skyline and the upward climb, Charlotte has a memory. One it rarely speaks about. Because in the files of the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department, there are hundreds of unsolved murders, names, and stories left behind in the dust of rapid progress. Some of these cold cases date back to the 1962nd. Others are much more recent. And while the city has expanded and modernized, the cases haven't aged gracefully. They've just aged. One of the most haunting examples is the case of Shirley Lee Black, a 19-year-old woman murdered in 1980. Her body was found in a field, far from where she lived. The investigation stalled almost immediately. No suspect, no motive, just a body in the grass and a family that never got to find out who or why. Then there's Calvin McDonald, a 4-year-old found shot to death in 1994 his home. Nothing was stolen. There were no signs of forced entry, no evidence of a struggle. The file was opened, investigated, and quietly filed away. And they're just 2 names among hundreds. What makes Charlotte's cold cases feel especially eerie isn't the absence of evidence. It's how many of these murders occurred in plain sight. Apartment complexes, neighborhood sidewalks, well-lit parking lots, but no witnesses, no arrests, no closure. The CMPD has a cold case unit, and in fairness, they've solved a handful of decades-old crimes using DNA technology and improved forensics. But that's a drop in a vast and widening bucket. For every reopened case, there are dozens more that remain untouched. Their folders collecting dust while the world outside moves on. Many of the cases involve victims from marginalized communities, people who didn't have loud advocates or media attention. Some were homeless, some were immigrants. Some were simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. But all of them were human beings, and their killers in most cases likely still live in the same city, maybe even the same neighborhood. Every so often, local journalists will revisit these stories. Do you remember her? Headlines, anniversary pieces, profiles of grieving mothers or siblings who never stopped hoping. The response is always the same: a brief spark of awareness, a few new tips, and then nothing. Charlotte is a city that knows how to build, but the one thing it's never quite figured out how to construct is a system of remembering. It treats the past like a speed bump, something to slow down for, briefly, before hitting the gas again. The city keeps building, the skyline keeps growing, and somewhere beneath it all, 100 ghosts are still waiting. And if you keep moving east, toward the coast, past the traffic, past the trees, you'll find another county with its own haunted map of names: New Hanover. A place where the water carries more than salt. Homicide cold cases in New Hanover County. Down in New Hanover County, where Wilmington leans into the Atlantic and the Cape Fear River snakes like a rumor through the land, the air smells different, a little saltier, a little heavier. The wind carries stories here, ones that are half whispered, half forgotten. And some of those stories begin and end with a name on a police file and no one left to speak for it. Start with Barbara Jean Anderson, murdered in 1981. Her body was found in a wooded area just outside the city limits. She was last seen walking home from a friend's house. No suspect was ever named. No arrests. The case is still listed on the county's official cold case roster, a placeholder for justice that never arrived. Or Frank Brown, found dead in his car in the late 1992nd. There were signs of a struggle, but no clear motive. Brown had no criminal record, no known enemies. His family described him as quiet, careful, and grounded. The autopsy gave answers that the investigation could not. Julia Rodriguez, another name on the list, was killed in a motel room under circumstances that defied clear explanation. Her killer left no fingerprints, no DNA, just an empty room and a hotel registry that told investigators nothing useful. There's a pattern in New Hanover's cold cases, one that's not unique to the area but unmistakable all the same. It's the pattern of people who should have been protected falling through the cracks. Vulnerable communities, isolated individuals, crimes that occurred quietly and were filed just as quietly. The Cold Case Division has tried to modernize. They've reopened some files, sent evidence for retesting, partnered with outside labs. But they're dealing with aging witnesses, missing records, and a public memory that doesn't always want to look backward. The real question isn't why these murders haven't been solved. It's why so many feel like they've been forgotten. Ask any local who's lived in Wilmington long enough, and they'll tell you about the names that don't get printed in the paper anymore. Cases whispered about over porch rails, cautionary tales passed between generations. A few stories have taken on an almost mythic tone. One tells of a body found near the old shipyard with no identification and no one ever coming forward. Another, repeated often but rarely confirmed, says that a woman once disappeared during a hurricane evacuation, only for her clothes to turn up years later, neatly folded on the same beach she left. Are those true? Hard to say. What's more chilling is that they could be. Because in New Hanover County, the stories you don't hear about are often the ones that come closest to the truth. And if you think the mystery only exists in history, consider this. In 2021, a man in Randolph County was shot outside a home. No suspects, no motive, no resolution. Because even now, the list keeps growing. And the silence, uninterrupted. Randolph County Cold Case, Jonathan Monte Flowers, 2021. It didn't happen in the 1972nd. It wasn't a black and white newspaper clipping. It wasn't lost in an attic or forgotten in a basement box of microfilm. It happened in 2021, in Randolph County, North Carolina. A man named Jonathan Monte Flowers was shot outside of a house in the town of Trinity, and to this day, no one, not police, not neighbors, not even the rumors can say exactly why. Monte was 27 years old, a father, a brother, a son. His family described him as someone with a big laugh and a bigger heart. He worked, he joked, he lived a life with roots and routine. Not exactly the sort of person you expect to be at the center of a murder mystery. And yet, on the 9th of October, 2021, shortly after 8:30 p.m., shots were reported on Fuller Mill Road. Deputies arrived to find Monte fatally wounded in the front yard of a residence. The details are sparse. There were people inside the home. Some say there was an argument. Others say there wasn't. Police questioned witnesses. No arrests were made. No suspects were named. In the weeks that followed, silence expanded, where answers should have been. What makes Monte's case especially frustrating is its contemporary proximity. This wasn't a remote cabin. This wasn't a back road lost to time. This was a modern home, in a residential area, in a time where doorbell cameras are common, where phones track your every move, where nearly everything leaves a digital footprint. And still nothing. The Randolph County Sheriff's Office released a few press statements in the days following the murder. They asked for information. They encouraged tips, but no public developments ever followed. As far as the official story goes, it simply stopped. But unofficial stories, they still swirl. Some claim Monte had been threatened before. Others say he was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time, caught in an argument that escalated without warning. Some whisper about connections to people who had reason to stay quiet, connections not easily proven and even less easily prosecuted. What makes cold cases like Monte's particularly unnerving is how quickly they can go cold in real time. There's this assumption that a fresh case means fresh evidence, fresh witnesses, a solvable puzzle. But in reality, a murder can go unsolved in a matter of days if no one talks and no one looks twice. The absence of resolution doesn't just haunt the family, it distorts the entire community. Fear creeps in through silence. The idea that someone can be murdered on a residential street and no one knows what happened isn't just terrifying, it's corrosive. It's the kind of silence that grows teeth. Monte's family continues to plead for justice. They hold on to hope. They share his photo. They ask for anyone to speak up. But in small towns, loyalty can be a double-edged sword. People protect their own. People keep secrets. People shut their doors and their mouths. And sometimes the truth sits in someone's living room like an uninvited guest no one wants to acknowledge. And so the murder of Jonathan Monteflowers drifts toward that terrible category. Not a crime that can't be solved, but a crime that won't be unless something changes. Unless someone speaks. Unless silence cracks. And while Monte's case is heartbreakingly recent, he is not alone in this state. Just a few counties east, in the city of Wilson, multiple unsolved crimes remain unanswered, spanning decades and demographics. Because in North Carolina, the shadows don't always recede with time. Sometimes they collect. Wilson, North Carolina, unsolved crimes. Wilson, North Carolina isn't known for mystery. It's known for its tobacco history, its train tracks, its quiet neighborhoods and wind-swept fields. It's the kind of place where people wave at stop signs and know each other's dogs by name. But in this modest city of about 50,000 people, there's a different kind of story being written, one that doesn't end. Dozens of homicides and disappearances remain unsolved here. Not hypotheticals, not urban legends, real people, real names. One of them is Tammy Ann Grady. She was 28 years old when she went missing in 1997. She was last seen leaving her home late one evening. Her car was found days later. She wasn't God. Decades have passed. No remains, no resolution. Just a void that her family still stares into. Then there's Mario Cruz Bautista, a 4-year-old man found dead in 2007. The details of his death were murky from the beginning. He was discovered in a remote area, and police released almost nothing publicly about the circumstances. His family, originally from Mexico, faced an added layer of difficulty: language barriers, legal questions, cultural fears, and the case quietly slipped from public view. But these two names are only the tip of Wilson's iceberg. A review of the city's public records shows that over 40 homicides remain unsolved, some dating back to the 1982nd. The victims are diverse: black, white, Hispanic, men and women, young and old. In every corner of the city, there are families who keep a photo on the wall and a question in their throat. Why haven't we heard anything? Some of the cases are textbook examples of lost time witnesses who moved away, evidence mishandled, original investigators long since retired. Others are far stranger. Take the case of a young woman who disappeared from her apartment complex in 2002. Her name was Angela, and though foul play was suspected, her body was never found. Her personal belongings were still in her home. Nothing stolen. The door was locked. No signs of a struggle. Then there's the case of a man who was found dead in his own front yard. Neighbors heard a noise but assumed it was fireworks. By morning he was gone and no one saw anything. At least, that's what they said. Why so many cold cases in one city? There's no single answer. It's not crime rate alone. Wilson's homicide rate isn't dramatically higher than the state average. But once a case goes cold, it tends to stay cold. especially when the victim lacks public visibility or social clout, when there are no marches, no reward posters, no interviews on the evening news. Just silence and statistics. Wilson PD does maintain a list of open homicides. Occasionally, they release anniversary posts or seek new leads, but many of the names never make it past a press release. They remain locked in archives, attached to case numbers and yearbook photos and street corners that nobody marks anymore. It's not that Wilson is cursed. It's not even uniquely negligent. It's that in places like Wilson, mystery is often mundane. Unsolved deaths get tucked between grocery trips and school board meetings. Life moves forward, but not for everyone. And the question lingers in Wilson's humid air, whispered under breath and passed down in stories. How many people got away with murder here? And how many more will? 'Cause if you stare too long at the faces on that list, the names that come without endings, you realize something chilling. It's not just that these mysteries haven't been solved. It's that no one knows if they ever will be.